Night, November 25th, 2014, and wishing everybody happy and healthy Thanksgiving holiday and a safe Thanksgiving holiday. I'd like to begin our meeting with Selectmen announcements and updates, and Selectman DeWitt, I know you've got some prepared.
Okay, I do have my list, which I'm always happy for people to add, chime in, supplement. I should point out that we're This is going ahead to next week, although we will be meeting on December 2nd. We do have the holiday coming in between. So on Wednesday, December 3rd at 3 p.m. in the Brookline Senior Center on Winchester Street, Brookline CAN is sponsoring a forum on the proposed Proposition 2.5 override vote that's scheduled for May 2015. The co-chairs of the Override Study Committee will make brief presentations, and there will be a question and answer session. And I believe the idea there is to just begin to educate members of the public about the issues that are involved in the override. Also on Wednesday in the evening at 7 p.m. in this room, Town Hall Selectmen's Hearing Room, there will be a public meeting giving an update on the planning for the Gateway East improvements on Route 9 in Brookline Village, and I do believe Selectman Wyszynski has a little more information.
Yes, I'd like to add a little to that. It's not only going to be a public meeting where we've invited some folks to, well, let me back up. The purpose of the meeting is to examine the Gateway East design to see if there's anything more we can do with respect to bicycle accommodations. So bicycle accommodations within the design are going to be the focus. And the project is on a very tight time frame. We have to get it funded next year, get it going out to bid. So this process where we're relooking at the design has to be a short process. Any design changes have to be relatively minor to fit in within the project scope, the timing, the right-of-way, and it has to be feasible and meet all the modes, accommodate all the modes. So I'm looking forward to that meeting. I understand a number of citizen designers have been working on some proposed designs, so it should be very interesting.
Great.
Then the following day, Thursday evening, again at 7 p.m. in this room, there will be a public meeting with transportation consultant firm Nelson Nygaard, who are presenting a proposal for a new townwide parking and transportation demand management policy, and the public is invited. Also on Thursday, December 4th, from 4 to 6 p.m., the Public Health Department will have the final free flu clinic for all Brookline residents. It will be held from 4 to 6 p.m. in the Health Department at 11 Pierce Street. And just a sort of a general announcement, the 32 members of Team Brookline for 2015 are all signed up to run in the Boston Marathon. They'll be raising funds for local charities, and it's important to notice that former Selectwoman Jessie Mermel is one of these gluttons for punishment who will be training, as they all will throughout the winter in preparation for the marathon.
Selectman Mermel has assured me that's all she's running for, too, though.
Aha, okay. But it's good to know that the team is filled, and they've done a wonderful job. I think they have collectively raised something like $400,000 for Brookline charities, and I guess 2 different marathon years. And just a reminder, on Sunday afternoons, the Winter Farmers Market will be held in the Arcade Building at 318 Harvard Street from noon to 5 p.m. Those are my announcements.
Great. Well, I'd like to add that today was the 30th annual Brookline Newton Thanksgiving football luncheon celebration. There's a lot of words in the title of this event, but it is a great event. Selectman Daley and I were both there. Our Brookline High School football team, the Warriors, are coming in with a 4-8 record this year, so not too bad. We've seen worse. And
But not as good as MIT, I gather.
no, I don't know about MIT.
Well, MIT is not a place you associate with football, right?
No.
And somehow their team has gotten into their league's, championship finals.
Oh, really? Well,
So it's an unusual event.
Excellent. And Harvard too this year, so Cambridge has got something to crow about. So anyway, terrific event as always, and thank you, Selectman Daley, for being part of that.
Oh, it's very nice. Did you guys already talk about First Light?
Well, no, but please do.
Well, it was
is
very
having
well-
happened, yes,
I
right,
took in
of
some of
course.
the events, and it seemed very well attended, and I went to hear our own Director of Public Health, Alan Balsam, doing his salute to Pete Seeger, which drew quite a big crowd, everyone singing along, so it was very good. But just want to let people know that lots of great shops in Brookline, and they're open for business for the Christmas season.
And it's also helpful for everybody to be reminded that we now have all of the trees lit up. So it's kind of a trigger to say, hey, folks, it's First Light time, pay attention. And I must say, it's nice to have the ones at Town Hall when you come into the building at night, or even at 4:30 in the afternoon when it's already dark.
Very nice. I actually attended the Brookline Village events for First Light at Chobe Hoy's office, and where there was a lot of balloon animal making going on, and also at the Korean church where there was a performance going on.
Performance,
too.
yeah.
Very nice. Thank you to our community development
and
office
organizers, yeah.
and all the organizers of that event. We don't have anyone signed up for public comment tonight, so we'll skip right to the miscellaneous agenda. First item for consideration is... I'm sorry? Yeah, you do. It's generally a sign up in advance. I don't know, does anybody have an objection? Like we can...
No.
If there's no objection, I'll take the public comment. Okay, you can go ahead and do it. But in the no, please come up to the podium. Just so you know, it's a 3-minute comment if you'd start by introducing yourself.
Yes. First of all, sorry, I did not sign up in advance. I'm Toby Raybold. I have a 1st and 4th grader at the Pierce School, and it's come to my attention that there hasn't been a lot of parent involvement at the Selectmen's meetings in regard to the override vote, and I would like to strenuously encourage you to fund 100%, not 90, not 65% of what is being asked for the schools. I first want to dispel the myth that this is a bubble or a bulge or whatever the burst kind of terminology that I've heard. My children are at Pierce, and it has nearly doubled in size since 2007. So my children's entire K-8 experience is in an overcrowded classroom situation and an overcrowded common space situation at a school that has not been renovated in over 40 years and is not scheduled to be renovated, even in the best case scenario, till after 2024. So their entire K-8 experience is going to be in this overcrowded school situation that started with 3 kindergartens for the current 8th grade and is now at 5 sections of kindergarten. So, and we all know what's going on in the high school, so their entire K-12 experience is going to be in an overcrowded school. So this bulge, if we're comfortable with this bulge, is an entire generation of children. And I'm not comfortable with that, and neither are most of the parents. I think you see in the report from the superintendent that the MCAS scores have leveled off, and I personally resent that my superintendent and my teachers and my principal have to spend an enormous amount of their time focused on space. And they are. Our principal meets with architects all the time because instead of focusing on academic achievement and closing achievement gaps and all of the things that she's supposed to focus on in schools, because we don't have enough room to educate the kids in our school. Superintendent Lupini said there was a 2006 report that predicted this kind of growth, and I am disappointed that the town hasn't done anything to date. And I want to ask if you will support the 100% funding for the override, And I would like to invite you to come to a parent forum at the Pierce School. We just had the superintendent there on Friday, and he met with 300 parents, and I've seen school committee members there, and I've never seen any of the selectmen, and I'd like to invite you to come at any time and hear from parents about how they feel about the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to we don't usually comment, but I just wanted to dispel the myth that the selectmen have not involved public comment. We've had two public hearings, long
No,
public
that we
hearings.
haven't
but-
come to them,
I'm sorry?
that parents haven't shown up.
Well,
to
many,
them.
many parents.
Many
have.
parents
The room was
showed
full
up,
twice.
and many expressed the viewpoints that you
Okay.
expressed. And by the way, there'll be at least one and probably two more before this is done.
Good.
Thank you. So the first miscellaneous item is item A, which is the question of approving the minutes from November 18th and 19th, and I didn't have any additions at all.
No, nothing.
Wow.
So
Hey,
that's a
Kate, well done.
good job, Kate. So I'd like to move that we approve both the minutes of November 18th and November 19th as submitted. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Next, we have the question of approving the application of Shilpa Liquors, Inc., DBA Village Liquors and Convenience, holders of an all-kinds alcoholic beverage license as a packaged goods store for the appointment of Vilyak Kumar Patel as an alternate manager. And any objection to that?
No, we actually voted it as a condition of their license, and I guess they are just getting their transfer completed.
And I took a look at the application, it all appears to be in order. So I move that we appoint Vilay Kumar Patel as alternate manager of the packaged goods store at 294 Washington Street, Shilpa Liquors, Inc., DBA Village Liquors and Convenience, holders of an all-kind alcoholic beverage license. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman
Aye.
DeWitt? Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Moving on, we have a question of two different temporary alcoholic beverage licenses. I'll do them in unison. The first is a temporary wine and malt beverage license to the Chamber of Commerce in connection with a holiday party to be held on December 4th from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. at the Teen Center, 40 Aspinwall Ave. The second is a temporary permit to serve all kinds of alcoholic beverages on town property to the Lars Anderson Honor Museum in connection with a holiday party for Newton Wellesley Hospital to be held on December 3rd from 5:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. at 15 Newton Street. All in favor of those two temporary alcoholic beverage licenses, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Abstain.
Chair votes aye. Thank you. Moving on to our regular calendar, the first item is item number 5, which is the question of adopting a resolution proclaiming December 3rd to be Arbor Day. Mr. Brady.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Appreciate your time. What a crazy year. So it started way back for us in April, and when we usually do our Arbor Day event, we knew that the Asian longhorn beetle, known as ALB, was going to be eradicated. So I said, well, we'll just tread water for a little bit and have a celebration in early fall and we'll be all set. So that got eradicated on June 21st, and on July 17th, I believe it was, we found a new pest, which has its own quarantine, which is called the emerald ash borer. It attacks ash trees. So we've been patiently waiting for the quarantine rules to come out for that, so we can use this as an opportunity to let folks know what's going on a little bit. And those quarantine rules just came out on November 17th, and so here we are. So if you happen to be watching or listening and you have ash trees in your yard, and they are in decline, I strongly advise that you reach out to your arborist and have them come take a look. The Asian longhorn beetle leaves very large holes that are easy to identify, and once we see them, you can pick them right out. The emerald ash borer is very different. It is very difficult to identify. It has small D-shaped holes. The symptoms that we will see on ash trees in their decline are very similar to other diseases, unfortunately, that ash trees have. But as of November 17th, we now have a statewide quarantine on the movement of ash trees or ash wood. Which means that you can't move firewood, you can't plant certain trees, and frankly, we had to kind of tread water for a little bit to make sure any trees we were proposing as an Arbor Day planting would not be in violation of that quarantine, and we now know we're going to be okay. In terms of Brookline's urban forest that we actually own, we have a fairly small percentage. It's in the single digits of ash trees, which is good, but we certainly have neighborhoods that are lined with ash trees in little clusters. So if there are residents who are watching and they have concerns with the ash trees that may be in decline, I ask them to contact our office and we'll go out and take a look and see what we can do. So, and that's how we got all the way to December to celebrate our Arbor Day, in the interest of making sure that we had all the information to give to folks. In terms of the event itself, some people say, well, you know, it's December. Well, it was 60 degrees today.
But tomorrow.
Tomorrow, we're going to have 2 to 3 inches of snow. And then by next Wednesday, when we do Arbor Day ceremony, it's going to be back up to 40 or 50 again. So as far as the tree is concerned, frankly, it's a great time to plant. The trees are asleep. All the nutrients and chlorophyll has gone back down into the root system. It's just kind of hanging out. We're plant it in the ground. It'll sleep all winter long. When it wakes up, it'll be ready to go. So it's a great time to plant. But if you are listening or watching, you do have ash trees in your yard, do keep an eye on them. This pest is very difficult to find. First, we found it out in North Adams, way on the far end. Then it was found up in Andover, and I did a site visit up in Andover and took a view of some of that. But most recently, and alarmingly for us, it was found in the Arnold Arboretum through the trapping program.
Wow.
So very close. We have had a visit in the community with the Director of Forest Health for the state to assess some of our ash trees. Unfortunately, because it's so hard to detect, to really see if they're there, you almost have to destroy the tree. So we think we're okay at this point, but if anyone has any concerns, if they reach out to our office, we'd be happy to take a look. And that's how we got here tonight for Arbor Day on December 3rd.
Very good. I'm sorry for my ignorance on the subject. Can you tell me, what does an ash tree look like? How can we
An
how
ash
can we
tree
identify
looks,
it?
they're kind of, it's got a gray furrowed bark. It's a large shade tree, very large, typically fairly upright, doesn't droop a lot, for example, like an elm. The challenge that we have with the ash trees is there have been other diseases around for a few decades called ash yellows or ash decline. And the symptoms for those versus this emerald ash borer are virtually identical. When they start to, we call it in our profession, we call it flagging. You'll see the dieback start from the top and start working their way back down. The concern with the ash trees is that when they do start to decline, they decline quite rapidly, and they experience structural failure fairly quickly and fairly dramatically. So they're a pretty big hazard. So we need to jump on them as soon as there's any question and make sure that we do a full inspection.
Very good. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes, Selectman DeWitt.
Tom, I believe there is an ash tree at the corner of Irving and Upland, a street tree. It is a magnificent, huge, humongous tree. I hope you have had an opportunity to check it out. And I mean, at my observation, which I probably see it every day at least once, if not twice, it seemed okay, but I'd love to know whether it's okay or not.
It's a great observation, Selectman DeWitt. We have looked at that tree as high up as we can get them in the canopy, which is about 78 feet
right.
to our hands in the truck or so. So far, so good.
Okay.
That tree is so mature, as you know, and it's literally surrounded by asphalt.
I was going to say, the fact that it has no place for its roots, we've never quite understood. It must be
Yeah, it has.
deep.
That tree has a kind of a steady rate of moderate decline because of what's around it.
Yeah.
So we go in and prune that, fortunately, every other year or so. It's on a very aggressive schedule. And we did that not so long ago, and we were checking for those D-shaped exit holes
Right.
while we were doing it.
Well, I'm glad to hear that you're paying attention. It's a magnificent tree, and the neighborhood cherishes it. So it would be a huge loss.
Agreed.
Other questions or comments for Mr. Brady? Okay, I'm going to read the proclamation and move that the board adopt the following proclamation, that whereas the Brookline Tree Planting Committee was created by a special act of the Massachusetts Legislature in 1886 to protect and preserve the town's tree resources, and whereas the town of Brookline, the Department of Public Works, and the Tree Planting Committee are committed to planting and maintenance for all town roadside shade trees, and whereas Brookline has been recognized as Tree City USA for over 25 consecutive years by the National Arbor Day Foundation for its care and stewardship of urban forest, and desires to continue its tree planting programs, and whereas the town of Brookline has been part of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts annual Tree City USA Awards Day program since 1988, And whereas the town of Brookline encourages neighborhood organizations, schools, families, and individuals to learn the importance of trees in observance of the Tree Planters Holiday, be it therefore resolved that the town of Brookline, through its duly vested tree planting committee, proclaims December 3rd, 2014 as Arbor Day in Brookline. All in favor of that resolution, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Happy Arbor Day, everybody. It doesn't take anything away from Thanksgiving.
It does not. And for those who would like to join us, it will be December 3rd at 10 o'clock at Lars Anderson Park, just as you exit onto Avon Street. We're planting a beautiful sugar maple, and we'll be joined by third grade students from the Park School.
Thank you.
I thank for the board for their time.
Thank you.
Next is the question of authorizing the filling of a vacancy in the Planning and Community Development Department. And Ms. Steinfeld, boy, you jumped right up there before I could even see.
Anxious to start a holiday. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alison Steinfeld, Planning Director. I'm here to seek your authorization to proceed to fill a position in the Planning Department, specifically a planner, that was vacated as a result of his resignation. This position is in the Regulatory Division, and the primary focus of his responsibilities is to provide staff support to the Planning Board.
Good. Questions? I think we're all familiar with that position. And any questions for Ms. Steinfeld?
Out of curiosity, is there any in-house person who might be eligible, or is this one we have to go out and search widely?
There is a possible in-house candidate.
I see.
All right. Regardless of whether there is an in-house candidate or not, my instruction and this board's instruction to you is, assuming this is authorized, that we seek a very diverse candidate pool for this position, and that we cast our net wide, make sure that we're being inclusive as possible. And if necessary, if you consult with Sandra DeBoe to make sure we're doing that.
I will definitely consult with the HR Director.
Thank you. Anything further? I move that we authorize the filling of a vacancy in the position of planner, GN10, in the Planning and Community Development Department. All in favor, say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you for your support.
You're welcome. Next, we have the question of appointing student officers as probationary police officers, effective November 25th, 2014. I see our candidates have all assembled in the room. And Chief O'Leary, tell us about your candidate pool.
Goodness,
Good
he's
evening.
wearing all of his shiny buttons.
I just want to say a couple of words first. Now, we have brought 8 highly qualified candidates for appointment as Brookline police officers in front of you tonight. And I think you knew a little bit about them probably about 7 months ago when we asked you to swear them in as recruit officers. And they've done a great job in the academy. Now, the academy out in Lowell started on June 2nd, and these gentlemen worked every day from June 2nd straight through till November 14th when they graduated. And they graduated as members of the class, and they did very well in the class. As a whole, I always like to go to the instructors on that day and talk not only to the sergeant that runs the academy, but also to the people that are actually the drill instructors. The drill instructors have a name that, you figure that they make them run and work out, but they really guide them through the academy as well. And both of the drill instructors spoke very highly of all 8 people that we had in the academy, which is great. I think you know all along that when we look to hire for our jobs, we have a standard that we want our recruits to meet just to get them to the place where they are today, and we expect them to excel at what they do. I've always looked at it, selecting the best group of people that we can, and that makes good for the department for the years to come. I think it's really important that we pick good quality people to start. We can always teach them to be police officers, but you can't teach high integrity, high quality, hard workers. And I think we've got a really good crew here, and I think that you'll be very impressed with what they've done so far in their young lives and what they've done in the 6 months that they've worked with us. Since November 14th, we've had them in the police station where they've met with a number of our officers. We've trained them in stuff that's specific to the Brookline Police Department. And on Monday, they had an occasion to be trained by Chief Paul Ford from the Fire Department. He came over and spent about an hour and a half or so with them, and we talked about a little bit about what he imparted on them tonight, and they were very impressed with what he had to say. And I thought that that was good. Paul volunteered to do it, and I thought that was really a fantastic thing. But when they're in the academy, they really learned a lot. I asked them to talk about some of the things that they had, classes that they had taken, and there's a whole variety of classes. But one thing that really stuck out, because it's something that we as a department are moving towards this year, and it's to do a lot more training on dealing with people with mental health issues. And we have a whole plan set in place to educate our department and get them trained and certified to certain levels. And these young officers have already been through part of that training as part of their academy classes, which kind of really melds well with what we're trying to do as we move forward. And I think that it's really a credit to that academy up in Lowell to kind of take on challenges such as this and educate such a young group. But needless to say, I'm very happy to present these people to you. I want to tell you a little bit about them and what they did while they were in academy. This time we had 3 of our 8 candidates that received special recognition at the time of graduation. And I do want to go into a little bit about what they've accomplished. The first officer could stand up, Christopher Crapo. Mr. Crapo is 27 years old. He's a graduate of Brookline High School. He graduated from Endicott College in 2008, where he attained a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. He's been employed as a public safety dispatcher with us since 2008. And I know if the name sounds familiar, it's because his father is a detective with us, Detective Larry Crapo, who usually takes the pictures tonight, but we gave him the night off. At the academy, Chris Crapo received the Lowell Police Academy's Captain Stephen Smith Award for the Academy's highest academic score, which was great.
Congratulations.
Next, if Spencer McWilliams could stand. Mr. McWilliams is 29 years old. He's a graduate of Newton North High School, so we have some challenge coming up in a couple of days.
Thursday could be tough.
Yeah. Then he graduated from Boston College in 2009, where he earned a bachelor's degree in communications and a Master of Science in Administration. Mr. McWilliams also graduated from the MBTA Police Academy in 2007, and prior to us, he was employed as a Boston College police officer. While at the academy, Mr. McWilliams, or Officer McWilliams, was awarded Lowell Police Academy's Outstanding Student Officer Award. Officer Will Walker. Officer William H. Walker III is 22 years old. He's graduated of Boston Latin Academy in 2008. He attended Northeastern University between 2008 and 2010, and he was working towards a degree in criminal justice. We met Mr. Walker when he was employed by us as a co-op student. After his stint as a co-op student at Northeastern, he was hired to work in our traffic division as a meter collector, and he worked there since 2012. And we selected him, and up at the academy, he was awarded Lowell Police Academy's Outstanding Student Officer in Defensive Tactics. Brian Sheehy, Officer Sheehy. Mr. Sheehy is 27 years old. He's a graduate of El Dorado High School in North Valencia, California, and he graduated from Boston College in 2010, where he earned a bachelor's degree in political science. Mr. Sheehy was also employed by us as a public safety dispatcher since 2011. Officer Sheehy. Officer Soderberg. Matthew Soderberg is 26 years of age. He's a graduate of Douglas High School and of Nichols College in 2010, where he earned a bachelor's degree in business administration. He was employed by Mass General Hospital, Police and Security Department since 2011, up until the time he was employed by us. Officer Armand Forbes. Mr. Forbes is 28 years old. He's another graduate of Newton North High School and of Springfield College in 2007, when he earned a bachelor's degree in sports biology. Just prior to being hired by us, he was employed by Scholars American Bistro, where he worked there since 2011. Officer Forbes. Officer Brian Gallagher. Mr. Gallagher is 25 years old. He's a graduate of Norwood High School in 2007 and Bridgewater State University in 2011. At Bridgewater State, he earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, and in 2011, we hired him as an E911 dispatcher to our Public Safety Dispatch Center. Officer Lally. Daniel G. Lally, 23 years old, a graduate of Brookline High School. He graduated in 2009 and is currently enrolled at the Framingham State University, working towards a bachelor's degree in criminology. Officer Lally. Those are our 8 candidates that we're very happy and very proud to put before you tonight for your consideration to appoint them as full-time probationary officers for the Brookline Police Department. If you are so inclined to appoint them, they will be given their assignments with a field training officer as of Monday. 4 will work in the daytime, 4 will work the first halves. They'll work in those positions with a full-time FTO for at least 2 months, probably 2 months and a couple of weeks, and probably sometime mid-January they'll be put out on the streets on their own. They'll be given their regular assignments at that point. So I ask the board for their consideration.
Thank you, Chief. Members of the board, Selectman Daley.
Yes, well, welcome, and I'm glad you did so well at the academy, so it's great. I think, though, if I heard correctly, we have 2 Newton North, but only 1 Brookline High School graduate, so I'm a little disturbed by that, but otherwise...
We won't hold that against
Yeah,
them.
we won't. We think we have a wonderful police force, and I think that you guys will be an asset to it. Just hearing all the news about Ferguson, lately, this is the kind of thing that we think would never happen in Brookline, because we have a police force that is much more attuned to what's going on with the public. And we appreciate all the hard work you put in, and I'm delighted to hear about the efforts to deal with the mentally ill. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I can second Selectman Daley's comments, but also want to add that we very much appreciate the service that you're about to give our community, but also the fact that your jobs put you at work on funny hours at different times. It can be very stressful to families, and frankly, we're very grateful that if your family can live with this situation, we appreciate their willingness to cooperate and be supportive, because we know that it's very important for the whole community, but it's also important for your family to understand that we recognize and appreciate the support they give, because we know they have to. And so I just want to say to family members, thank you very much. I know we have a couple of sort of legacy folks here who are their regular parts of the community, but for those of you who've come from other communities, we welcome you, and we look forward to seeing you out there on patrol. And I have just a sort of question for the chief. Do you have anybody left in dispatch?
Yes, because of, we staggered the hiring. We knew we were losing. In addition to the 3 people that we lost here, we did lose a 4th to the fire department.
Yes, I remember.
And we hired a couple in July, in January, a couple more in April. And they're all doing well. We got the last person hired 2 weeks ago, and he graduated from the academy 2 weeks ago, and he's in training right now. So we are fully staffed back at the
Good.
Public Safety Dispatch.
I would think that experience in dispatch is probably being recognized as an asset for young officers.
Absolutely, an asset both for them and for us.
Right.
When we first had the opportunity to hire this group, we knew that they wanted to either get on the police or the fire department, and we knew that we had them for several years, that not only could we give them a good job with a good salary and attain a residency in Brookline, but we could also test them ourselves, make sure that they knew what they were doing, and they weren't afraid of the work. And they've all excelled at what they did, and we had a great experience with them. That's why we stayed, and we hired these next 4 under the same kind of guidelines that we did earlier.
Thank you, Chief. Anyone else?
I want to echo the comments of my fellow board members and say thank you for your willingness to step up and protect this community, keep us safe, and hopefully you will keep yourselves safe as you travel around the town of Brookline. I also want to echo a comment that was just made. I want to thank you for your previous service to the town. Many of you have come from the dispatch center or the traffic division, so hopefully you will continue to serve in many cases with distinction. So thank you very much.
Selectman Waschinsky.
And I don't have much to add, but just to say that you're coming on to a force that is respected in the community. So it's a nice thing, and I hope you'll continue in that tradition and make us proud and keep us safe.
And I'll add my welcome, and I also want to thank the chief and your staff, whose judgment and recommendations on these appointments we value almost exclusively. Thank you. You have never let us down in this regard. And you should all bear that in mind. You have this man to thank. So I move that we appoint the following student officers as probationary police officers effective today, November 25th, 2014. Christopher Crapo, Spencer McWilliams, Brian J. Sheehy, Matthew M. Soderberg, William H. Walker III, Ahmad J. Forbes, Brian J. Gallagher, and Daniel G. Lally. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Congratulations, gentlemen.
If I could, we just have a couple of things. I know that they're here with a lot of family members, but they're also, we have to ask Pat Ward to come up to see if he can swear them in first. And I did want to point out in the audience, quietly sitting in the back, is one of our chaplains, Father Brian Clary of St. Mary's. Came here tonight too.
Father Clary.
So Pat, would you like to swear in the new officers? And then we were going to ask them to have their badges pinned on by someone in their family.
Does the selectman want to stand beside, or why don't you do that first? Okay. Okay. It's nice and easy. Okay. Just repeat after me. I state your names.
I, Morris Evans,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear and affirm
that I will faithfully and impartially
that I will faithfully and impartially
discharge all the duties incumbent upon me
discharge all the duties incumbent upon me
as a police officer for the town of Brookline,
as a police officer for the town of Brookline,
according to the best of my ability and understanding,
according to the best of my ability and understanding,
agreeably to the rules and regulations of the Constitution
agreeably to the rules and regulations of the Constitution
and the laws of the Commonwealth,
and the laws of the Commonwealth,
and under rules, regulations, and bylaws
and under rules, regulations, and bylaws
made under authority thereon.
made under authority thereof.
Congratulations.
I know that whoever was designated to pin the badge on the officers and walk them up. Anybody want to take a picture? All right, where's Justin? How are we going to all fit in here?
Very wide angle.
In the back?
Well, step up, President, step up. I move back.
Larry, we might have to activate you.
Move back or, there we go. Chris, take one step back. Perfect. All right, I can get one with everybody's hat off?
Sure.
Can you get everybody's face, that'd be perfect. There we go. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Congratulations.
Yeah, I was going to say I would love some water myself. Thank you.
Head out to the...
Thanks, Chief. Next, we're going to proceed with agenda item number 8, and this is the question of committing an additional $650,000 for the Pine Street Inn in connection with the acquisition and rehabilitation of the lodging houses at 51, 53, 55, and 57 Beale Street. And Mr. Blood and Ms. Bullock, I see, and I see our Pine Street Inn representative as well.
Good evening.
Good evening, Roger.
Tough act to follow. I'm Roger Blood, Chair and representing the Unanimous Housing Advisory Board. We're back to ask for the final order from you, funding by the town of a terrific project you've heard from us before about last year, and that is the funding of 51 through 57 Beale Street, sponsored by the Pine Street Inn, who we've had a wonderful working relationship with over some period of years. This is a 31-unit, 31-room, single-room occupancy pair of adjacent rooming houses on the same street as the birthplace of JFK. Originally, we were here last year, so I won't review the whole details of the project, but you recall that it was what's known as enhanced lodging house rooms, which include not only bath facilities in the individual rooms, but many cooking facilities as well that we rezoned for this enhanced type of unit. This development was acquired and is now going to be fully renovated by the Pine Street Inn. It's a total $9 million project, the total cost of the project, including acquisition and upgrading. For the 31 units, that comes out to about $290,000 per unit. The town's share of the total will be about 22% of that, or about $63,000 per unit. to get these 30 additional affordable units in our inventory. As with the Dummer Street project, which you heard before, this meets several of our priority needs. It's rental housing, and it's housing for the very low income end of the spectrum, which qualifies as affordable housing in town. I'm going to ask Jan Griffin, the Director of Program Planning for Pine Street Inn, to give you a little bit of further commentary on what their plans are up to this point. This is, as you know, a $650,000 increase in the amount of our request, and it is the final amount, from what you approved last year of $1.3 million approximately, will now be a total of $1.95 million. So, and then when Jan's completed her remarks, we'll give you the formal request, which you have in front of you.
Thank you. Welcome back, Jen.
Thank you very much. It's nice to see you all tonight. And as I said to Virginia, it was just a nice piece of Brookline history to see that swearing in. It was very nice. The crux of why we're back requesting more funding is because we've gone through our construction bidding process. And we had thought that we would just need to do that once. And after the one time through, we were $1.2 million above our estimate for which we put in our funding applications originally. So we went back out for a second try, got better pricing from one contractor with whom we will go with, Seaver Construction. And everyone that I speak with, folks from DHCD, other contractors, it's just a project this size is just in a grouping that is incredibly competitive right now in terms of materials for the most part, and also labor. Still coming out of the recession is what I've been told. Material costs are going up exorbitantly, and labor hasn't caught up. So there's a shortage of labor, is what contractors have told us. So that's why the pricing is what it was. We have settled, with a contractor and a price, and we're running at that, and we hope to close early next year. I'm hoping end of January, early February, so we hang on to that price and move forward with the project. So I know Roger's coming up again, but I just want to have the opportunity and not lose it to thank you. This is a phenomenal project for Pine Street. It's big. It's 31 units of affordable housing. And we all know that those two buildings could have gone in another direction. And we are just thrilled about this project. Our last project was 10 units. So this is big for us. And we know we can manage it. We have other bigger buildings. We're in the 50-unit range, but we're just thrilled. And in particular, I want to thank Roger and the HAP for all of their support. We've gone to them multiple times, and it's just been wonderful. And I also want to thank the Department of Planning and Community Development, in particular Virginia Bullock, Joe Viola, and Bruce Genest. They're a terrific team. I hope you know that, but I need to say it because little glitches come along, and they're real problem solvers, and they get to the bottom of things, and then we move on to the next step. So I'd be happy to answer any of your questions about the project, but I just really sincerely thank you for your support.
Thank you. How long do you think construction will take?
Construction will take 16 months because we're phasing the project. So one building will remain completely full of tenants while the other building is under construction, and then we switch that.
I see.
So that slows things
Is there a
down.
building that's vacant right now, or will you
No,
have to move
no.
tenants, or you have to wait until they leave by attrition, or?
Since, for the past year and a half, we've filled no vacancies. So we're actually running at a significant loss on the two buildings. But we did that consciously to help us when construction came. So at this point in time, we have 11 vacancies. And we will need to, if we were to start tomorrow, we would have to temporarily relocate 8 people. Now that could improve by the time we
Right.
start construction.
Good. Other questions? Selectman DeWitt.
Well, I just have to say, Jen and I go a long way back. We've had a wonderful relationship with Pine Street Inn, and this, I was trying to figure, this is going to be the fourth property in Brookline, is that right? I mean, I know they're multi-unit buildings, but this will be the fourth separate. And we've had a wonderful working relationship. They provide wonderful services for their tenants, and everybody who has the opportunity to live in this enhanced, I guess it's more like studio apartments rather than the old-fashioned lodging house, will benefit enormously from that opportunity to be in a good, caring environment. And I also would like to point out that all of those units are permanently affordable and will 100% go to satisfy our 40B requirement, which is a bonus, not the most important thing, but one we value highly. So I'm looking forward to opening and seeing the new tenants.
Selectman Waschinsky.
Just, when do you start construction?
If all goes well and we can close at the end of January, we'll start right away in February.
Good. Any other questions for either for Jan or for Roger or for Virginia?
I want to
Selectman Frank.
thank Roger and the whole Housing Advisory Board for working so diligently to bring forward great projects like this. It's an example of an easy, affordable housing project for us to support. It's a community goal to make Brookline inclusive and welcoming place for everybody. And thank you for your hard work, Roger, and your colleagues on the board.
Virginia, maybe you know, how much do we have on the Housing Trust Fund right now?
Roger's going to ask for the formal vote, and part of what we're doing here, it seems a little choppy, is we always try to maximize our federal funds. So, for instance, we've spent forward a couple of years with home. This is some extra money that we got repaid from a home buyer that we're reprogramming into this project. Similarly, we're going to be asking as part of the vote to bring forward, potentially, depending on what the needs are in the next couple of years, potentially repay some of our housing trusts back. Right now, if this is funded, once this is funded, do we want to say this publicly? It'll be about, probably around $2.7 million will be left in the trust fund.
Okay.
As you know, that's not a great deal. That could get eaten up very easily by one project, and it's not replenishing as quickly as we'd like it to. There haven't been inclusionary zoning projects like there were during the 2000s that funded those, partially because people are putting units on site, and we changed the free cash policy. So it's slow. It replenishes at a slower rate than it had in the 2000s.
Understood.
But an observation would be that they are very, very effective at leveraging the housing trust funds with and maximizing access to all other program funds that are available.
That's what we tried.
Does this expenditure of CDBG and home funds mean that there's any other program that we're running that is going to suffer for it?
I'm not sure your question.
You're using, your proposal is to use $245,000 of CDBG
Right.
funds and $170,000 from home funds.
Right.
Was that money ever previously earmarked for any other program?
No, the CDBG funds, we knew that they were going to be, Pine Street was going to probably be coming back to us, so we asked for that as part of the FY15, and we got repaid a couple of homebuyer grants from people that sold their units, so we are just reprogramming that home money.
Okay.
So they're not suffering, and we try as much, I used it as an example to say that we try as hard as we can to utilize those sources first, because our housing trust is the more flexible funding.
Good. Roger?
The challenge has been to make sure that we get to use usefully our federal funds before we lose them timing-wise to some other community. You may recall we had over some years an individual homebuyer assistance program. We would help with the down payment assistance to individual home buyers in the range of up to $150,000 or so. The HAB has willingly kind of put that on the back burner in favor of the kind of programs such as this that we're bringing forward.
Okay,
That leverage more money.
good.
Yeah.
Selectman Daley?
I just have a question for Mr. Kleckner from something that Virginia said. I thought our change to free cash was meant to benefit affordable housing.
Well, it continues to be an allocation from free cash, and there will be an allocation and appropriation. I think it's modified a bit. The formula is just a bit. I don't know exactly how it impacts things, but it may have slowed the growth a bit in replenishing the fund.
But our free cash balances haven't been
That's
at
great.
the very high levels to.
Yeah, I think that's been the issue, is free cash is down.
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know somebody will. I seem to remember that there was a comment that was made by some of the rating agencies that we needed to increase our free cash balance several years ago.
Right.
Which I imagine necessitated keeping more free cash.
Unallocated
Unallocated fund, I'm
right,
sorry.
Exactly.
Rather than tripping over to
Our
some
buddies
of our
at
other trust
Moody's
funds.
did that.
Yeah.
Right.
The formula is actually better than it used to be, but the overall order of magnitude that gets thrown off by that formula is just simply less than what we would get from a new project that the developer gives us lump sum cash for inclusionary zoning. The towns are maybe in the very low six figures, and any significant inclusionary zoning project could be in the mid or even the upper six figures.
Got it. Okay. Any further questions or comments?
Good
Just wanna-
project, good partnership.
We just want to assure you, I mean, this is a very happy moment, and all the HAB members are enthusiastic about their vote, but prior to the vote, especially when the second time around to increase request comes, our members are not afraid to ask very tough questions, and they understand tax credits and the fine points of development financing. So I think Jan would agree. She and her financial consultant did face some good questions, and that's what the HAB is also there for.
Good. Thank you, Roger. I move that we approve committing up to an additional $650,000 to Pine Street Inn in connection with the acquisition rehabilitation of lodging houses at 51 through 57 Beale Street as follows: $245,000 from fiscal year 2015 CDBG funds, $170,400 from home funds, and $234,600 from housing trust funds. I further move that we authorize the Director of Planning and Community Development to sign on behalf of the town of Brookline all required documentation approved by Town Council related to such CDBG, home, and housing trust loans. That we also authorize the chair to sign a commitment letter in support of the project, which proposed draft is before you, and also to commit to the repayment of the housing trust loan from future CDBG allocations at the fastest rate possible, considering other town priorities. All in favor, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt? Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you all.
Can I say,
Thank you.
while we have Roger and Virginia here, maybe we can have 2 minutes of discussion on, Selectman Waschinsky and I took a field trip with them to Linfield recently to look at an affordable housing situation they have there for seniors, and if you want to just say something briefly about that?
Very brief. It's an interesting concept. I've been involved with housing finance for almost 50 years, and I always thought housing was either rental or owner. And this was something I'd never seen before, and also thought it might be interesting for us to go and have a firsthand look at in presentation. It's called Life, Inc., Life Initiative for Elders, I believe it stands for. It's municipal partnership just in the town of Linfield between the local town government and a locally grown nonprofit, which develops in cooperation with the town and with the use of pilot agreements, payments in lieu of taxes, housing at a very low cost, but as those of us that saw it, very attractive housing. And the vehicle that makes them affordable is, for seniors, is life estates. The sale of the unit is not the unit itself, but a life estate in the unit. And so the seniors who are local can live there for the rest of their lives, and the purchase price is roughly half, give or take, of what a comparable condominium unit might be.
So it's more like a limited equity co-op, right? I mean, that's a closer model. It's not exactly what that is, but similar.
It's not really a co-op, but it has many of the same characteristics because of the nonprofit developer Life continues to own the entire property.
Right.
Whereas with a co-op, you actually, as the owner, would have
No, no,
stock.
I understand, but
Yeah.
I guess the financing is similar, although the organizational structure is a little different.
It felt similar in that way, yes, yes. And it has a big success story. There's 3 projects and a very long waiting list.
And is it an age-in-place concept where services are available on site as people age and need more?
No, it's not. It's targeted at mainly empty nesters and people that have sold their homes in the town and are looking to downsize and remain in their long-term community. But it's basically just a straight housing proposition.
But
very
then
low
it is
cost.
age-restricted, though, right?
Yes.
That, I think, is maybe what Selectman Goldstein was trying to
Yeah, but
understand.
no, they don't have services. We did ask about that. And you can contract.
So it's literally, it's housing.
You can contract with
Yeah.
somebody to come into your unit and give you services, but they don't facilitate that in any way. That would be you and the visiting nurse or something like that.
There's
working it
another
out.
concept which you may be hearing about, and I know that Mr. Blood already knows about too, called aging in place, which
Yeah.
might work on this model, but also be supplemented with this idea that the services that people need as they age can be added to the mix. So
Well, we're going to actually see that. I went to see a very interesting housing development today in Wellesley called Waterstone at Wellesley.
Right.
And that developer, the reason I went there, he's going to replicate what he's done out there at the Circle Cinema site. And it was very impressive. And Selectman Goldstein, it's more along the lines of a much more heavily, fully serviced senior housing offering.
interesting.
The only thing I want to add is that we just did a needs assessment, and we did hear from seniors at all income levels that there's more of a need for independent living and other types of senior housing here in town. The waiting lists are really long for most of them, and particularly for the sort of more middle income housing, there's not a lot that's available here. So that's one of the reasons we went to look at it.
Thank you, Virginia.
One of the most interesting things that we saw that kind of made some of us smile, the individual who founded and is the spark plug for this nonprofit corporation, had served previously for many years as the moderator of the town meeting, as a selectman for several terms, and then as the town administrator. All 4, and now he's doing this. So there's quite a human partnership with the town as well as a corporate one.
Very good.
Sounds like he was also planning for his own long-term housing.
He's on the list.
Well, yeah, he is on the list,
Not taking advantage of it.
but he's turned down a couple of offers.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you.
Good evening. Happy Thanksgiving. We have some boards and commission interviews, please. Next is a applicant for appointment to our newly formed Complete Streets Study Committee, Mitch Heineman. Is Mitch here? Yep. Good evening. Come right to the podium, please. Welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us why you're interested in serving on our Complete Streets Committee and why you're qualified to do so.
I've had a lifelong passion for good neighborhoods, good streets. I'm a former head of the Town Bicycle Advisory Committee. I was the first chairman when the committee was reconstituted. But I'm more than a cyclist. Like any cyclist, or most cyclists, I also drive a car. I walk. For the last year, I've been walking to work. I've been a resident of Brookline for 13 years. My wife's family has been here for many years. I have a teenager, a 20-year-old, a father-in-law who's 80 years old, who just moved to senior housing on Beacon Street from South Brookline. I believe strongly that I'm a civil engineer. My profession is water resources, so I'm expert in stormwater. And from that perspective of complete streets, I'm very knowledgeable about low-impact design. My bigger interest, or my personal interest, is transportation. I've always had a lifelong interest in that. And I believe that as a civil engineer, we've given too much priority to cars over the last century. And things are changing. Like Mayor Menino said a few years ago, the car is no longer king. In my profession, I can give you an example that we designed wastewater treatment plants for 50, 60 years to just take the water away. At first, we just took it away, then we started purifying it. Top minds in wastewater treatment plant design in the last few years have been saying, you know, it was the wrong thing. And that's what we need to do in transportation planning as well, to realize that building a car-centric society has been a bit of a mistake, and we need to move the world forward beyond a car-centric society to something that's equitable for everyone, for pedestrians, for cyclists, for cars, for public transportation, and for all members of society, for the young, for the able-bodied adults who can take the choices of any form of transportation, as well as for our elders we were just talking about, who need to be reliant on public transportation and walking and want to be able to live safely in their communities. I live in Coolidge Corner. I live on Beale Street, which we were just talking about. It's a fantastic neighborhood. It's about as complete as we get in the Metro Boston area. I'd like to see that expanded to more parts of town and strengthen what we've got here. You want me to keep going? Give you some...
No, you're doing great. You're welcome to keep going. Selectman Daley, I see has a question over
Well, I
there.
was happy to hear you mention, was it your father or your father-in-law?
Father-in-law?
Yeah, because I appreciate your bicycle interest, but we have quite a few members of, quite a few bicyclists now on the Transportation Board. And I will tell you that I'm on the Council on Aging. I'm our representative on the Council on Aging. And I will tell you that many of the seniors in town feel like their needs as pedestrians are being shunted aside a little bit in favor of the bicyclists. So I'm happy that you can bring the other perspective as well as your own as a bicyclist to this issue.
In Copenhagen, which is considered the world leader in complete streets and urban planning for the next century, they like to, and then there's a company, Copenhagenize. They don't think of things as having bicyclists. They think of having people, and they think of the bicycle as just a standard utility, like talk about it as a vacuum cleaner. Like they don't get excited about people being cyclists. It's just a tool to get from one point to another. A bicycle can be a lot more than that. I love to do bicycle touring. I've taken my bicycle all over the world and taken it on vacation to just go touring around and enjoy life. But I very much see things through the perspective. As I said, I had small children. I've seen the world through the perspective of small children. The house I live in is a two-family. My landlords for many years were my wife's grandparents, who lived in place until they died respectively at 98 and 101 years of age, living on Beale Street. They used to walk up to Bread and Circus at the corner, now Andrew's Catering, to do their grocery shopping, and of course all the other great shopping around Coolidge Corner. And my wife's grandmother was literally living in the house until she was 101 years old, and the last year, she was just walking a block. But that was a wonderful block, and she could do that. And now my father-in-law, living in the Heber Senior Life Housing up at, I think it's 1550 Beacon, he's 80 years old, and he's realizing down in South Brookline, he's got a car-centric life there, and he wants to be able to age in place in the neighborhood. And I do a lot of walking. As I said, I've been walking to work. I walk 3 miles to work every day for the last year. I also drive. I've been through all the sports with my kids. I drive kids to school. I've driven all over. I've driven across country several times. I can take all the different perspectives.
Do you mean that in Copenhagen they don't have bike lanes?
Actually, in Copenhagen, they're very committed to bicycle side tracks. What's the cycle tracks? Bike lanes are considered inferior by them, and when they do their design, cycle tracks are the priority. No, but what they don't consider is that people are cyclists, that there isn't a class of people called cyclists. There are people, and depending on the best way to get from point A to point B, they'll walk, they'll take their bicycle, or they'll take a car, or they'll take public transportation. That they don't have, they don't have the bicycle culture like we do here of, people clad in spandex and bicycle messengers, and that you get on the bicycle and you go riding the bicycle in a special place. It's just part of the urban fabric.
It's part of what everybody does, not what a discrete group does.
Right.
Understood. Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much. We're not making appointments tonight. We've got a number of candidates, and we've got 2 more to hear from tonight.
Very capable candidate.
Yeah, we sure do. Linda Olson-Pelkey, you're next. Hi, Linda.
Hello.
Tell
Good
us,
evening.
we know a little bit about you already, but tell us
I'll
more
tell you
and
why
why
I'm
you're
interested
interested.
in this committee in particular. I think Mitch touched on it a little bit. I think there has been an evolution in the thinking on the part of planners and engineers and architects and designers that one of the key attributes to a livable city is our streets and sidewalks and making them more humanized, I would say. I also think that the promise of complete streets to Brookline has a great deal to offer, and I think it could bring a lot of benefit for a lot of the goals that we already have in terms of better safety for everyone, better mobility, better access, enlivening our commercial areas, helping with our climate goals, our pollution goals, and also the green infrastructure I'm very interested in. I think that our streets and sidewalks are just a huge part of our public realm, and making them more inviting for people to linger and to walk is going to be a huge benefit. I think we have some very particular challenges in Brookline to put this all together. I've read the scope. I've given a lot of thought to what the charge of the committee is. I think what I can help with, I'm not an engineer, but I do have transportation and planning background. And so I think one thing for sure I can help with is the data that we're going to need for the mode share goals, and also how to do some of the measuring for the performance statistics that will need to be derived, because we are trying to qualify for the state program. And so there will be reporting criteria, and so we'll have to find ways to measure. I also think the development review process that we will be trying to standardize some procedures for, I have a particular expertise in. I think some of the other challenges for Brookline are just the number of groups and stakeholders that need to be involved in coming up with the policy, but also with implementing the policy. And I think we've seen already, our challenges with limited staff and funding. So I think that it's going to take some real work and commitment on the part of this committee, possibly a follow-up committee, and everyone involved in the process of coming up with the policy.
Linda, are you familiar with the specific bit of regulation, state regulation that we're talking about?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Why?
Because that's, in my experience with you, that's one of your best attributes is I think you're savvy about those.
Yeah, I'll tell you why. Because my first job out of planning grad school, I went to Rutland, Vermont. I was the regional planner, actually, for 27 towns. And my boss threw this little paper booklet on my desk. It was the enabling legislation from the state, and says, I think you better read that. And that's how I figured out what my job was. So, yeah, I do my research.
Good. Other questions for Linda? Selectman Waschinsky.
Do you see any bylaw changes that are going to be necessary, or is it merely policy and ways of thinking about street design?
Yeah, obviously this is something that the committee is going to have to figure out. It's one of our big tasks. But I do know that on the Massachusetts level, the only community I'm familiar with is Somerville, who adopted an ordinance to implement their complete streets. Other communities have done policies. I think it's a little bit dangerous. I remember the example of the design guidelines for the Red Cab site and how they went missing and no one ever implemented them. And I would hate to see that happen here. So I think I'm keeping an open mind about that. I think it could take some bylaw changes. Yes.
Selectman DeWitt.
I'm guessing that you're aware of the ongoing consultation with Nelson Nygaard talking about transportation demand management.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know how you see that integrating with the complete streets notion. I'm also kind of following up on the thought that there are a lot of different constituencies involved in this. So What is?
Yeah, well, my sense of it is I see, a lot of the policies say this is for every street in every location. And I kind of think in Brookline, we're going to have to pick and choose a little bit, especially when we want to do a pilot project. So I could see it being married with an area that is identified by Nelson Nygaard as being on the, pathway of a complete streets project, that kind of thing, which would help facilitate the transportation demand management goals of those sites. I think it makes sense to do them in concert and to pay attention to what he comes up with. And my sense of what Jason and his team are going to be doing is figuring out different goals for different parts of our community. They are, not all as transit accessible, et cetera, as we might like.
Sure. Thank you.
Any other questions for Ms. Olson-Pelkey?
Can I ask one question? Do we know who's going to be the select person to chair this committee?
I don't think we know that yet.
Oh, okay. All right.
It's a darn good question.
All right. Thank you.
Dr. Vitolo. You know the question. Jump right in.
Tommy Vitolo, 153 University Road, town meeting member, precinct 6. For me, at least, I see this, the work of this committee in two distinct phases. Right? The first phase is laser focused on making sure that we meet the state requirements to be a complete streets community, so we can get some complete streets funding. Right? I mean, it's really simple. We want the dough. We want to spend the dough well, so let's qualify for the dough. And that's the first part, and I think that we can do that relatively quickly. Littleton, Mass. has a really strong complete streets policy. It's short, it's sweet, it's been approved, it's a heck of a template. I expect we'll use that and perhaps a few other communities as well, and dot our i's and cross our t's. But the second part of it is, we'll do that, and we'll do a great job of that, I don't doubt it. If I'm not on the committee, I'll sit in the back of the room and just throw out ideas as necessary.
If I know us, we'll do better than Littleton does. But
I hope we will. But the second part is the vision. And complete streets, it's apple pie, it's motherhood. It's everybody's all for complete streets. We all intuitively, even if we forget to ask for it, we all intuitively want all of our streets to be as safe as possible, to be as convenient as possible, to be highly functioning for all user groups, for all ages, for all abilities. Of course we do, right? Why wouldn't we? The trick is there's a limited right-of-way. There's only so many feet between one property line on one side of the street and the other property line on the other side of the street. And we can be clever in maximizing the utility, but we can't give everybody everything they want on every street. There's just not enough street. That's a reality. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't want we don't want every street to be a major boulevard with massive amounts of traffic flowing through it. We may actually want some streets to have limited throughput. I'm glad University Road is a one-way street, because if it ran the other way, everyone coming in from Cleveland Circle would bang a right on University to skip the light at Washington and come out on the other side, and we'd have so much more motor vehicle traffic. And while it's inconvenient that it's a one-way street for the residents, I think on the whole, it is it's a better street because of it. And so we need to think about what we want out of different streets, similar, sort of piggybacking on what Linda said, and that's okay. We also need to come up with a way to lay out what our values are for the different areas of town to help guide these decisions. Infrastructure lasts a long time. Most of the curbstones in Brookline were there 100 years ago in the exact same location. They don't have to be. We could make tree pits wider, right? Every time we rip open a road, we can change the layout at relatively low marginal cost. We've already ripped open the road. We typically don't. And I think a big portion of that is because we don't have any thought process for, we're cutting open this road. Is it really the way we want it? Are there things that we want to change? I don't feel like the town has a process to ask and answer that question, and so instead we lose the opportunity. We replace like with like because, it's hard to complain about no change most of the time, and that's where we end up. An example where that's not happening, of course, is Gateway East, where there's a lot of right-of-way and a lot of changes, and that's even more complicated because of the state's helpful interference, shall we say. But that's an example. Participation. That's an example where we came into the project saying we don't have to lay out every square foot of right-of-way exactly the way it used to be. And we're working on that. There's a meeting for that the same week as the Nelson Nygaard meeting. It's the day before.
We announced that, and I'll be there.
One on Wednesday, one on Thursday next week.
And so I think it would be helpful if this committee at least lays out some ways for the town to figure out what roads are worth a redesign and how to go about that process in a way that's effective and frankly doesn't burden folks in the front of this room with too many of the details, right? I imagine you guys don't want, if you can help it, to be burdened with all of the details of every change in town. You guys have big thinking to do. So if we can lay out ways to get the details right or close to right in a sort of a smooth process, then we'll get slow incremental change at relatively low cost that will, over time, add to the value of what may be in North Brookline at least, our single largest public asset, our streets and sidewalks.
Very good. Questions for Tommy? Selectman Daley.
Yes, well, I like what I just heard you say, but I do have to ask you, Dr. Vitolo, I recall on one occasion you saying something to the effect of bicyclists should be able to ignore things like red lights.
I've never said that.
It was something along that line, if they safely could go through.
I've never said that. What I would say, though, is that we have 20th century infrastructure and 20th century rules, and the way people are getting around is different. And so it is certainly reasonable to reapproach our rules and our policies and our infrastructure and decide if it's still working. I don't advocate for running a red light or for jaywalking or for speeding. Those are things that we wouldn't encourage.
Okay.
Selectman Franco.
Dr. Vertolo, you are widely known as a transportation advocate in town, particularly for bicycles. And in this conversation, we've talked a lot about the trade-off that may be necessary between different users of streets. Mm-hmm. You are a father of 2 young children, and I wonder if that perspective would be an advantage on this committee. Do you think that you would bring something special, an unheard voice, to the committee?
Well, maybe. All users in town are different and have different experiences. I certainly ride the T, and I walk, and I ride a bike. In fact, I drove here tonight just to gain the experience. I had never driven before. And I thought, looked for parking, checked it out, right?
How'd you like it?
It was fast. Yeah. I only heard like a half a song on the radio. That part was kind of nice. And actually, in fact, I ride my bicycle on the sidewalk almost every single day at slower than walking speed because
You ride on the sidewalk?
I ride with my son, who's 4 and has a balance bike, and goes so catastrophically slow. It's just miserable. But we got to get to and from daycare every day, and we don't have a car. So it's 3/4 of a mile, and we ride on the sidewalk on neighborhood streets with extremely low pedestrian traffic at speeds slower than walking.
Okay, I have a question.
And I think that's okay, and it is legal.
All right, I have that's part of my question, because I actually have a real problem with bicycling on the sidewalk. I'm happy if you walk your bicycle and are at least, when you're sharing what I consider to be a pedestrian designated area, you treat your bicycle, you walk it because you're actually being a pedestrian at that point. But I will say that I am in fear sometimes of people on bicycles who come down sidewalks.
Understood.
And what I feel is strongly is that, I totally agree with you about the fact that we have a limited amount of street space, a limited amount of sidewalk space, all of which is public and all of which has to be shared. And what I would love to see is a clarification about how we share in ways that give everybody a safe well, not just feeling of safety, but guarantees everybody's safety.
So
And that
I was
would
thinking
include,
guarantees safety.
not wearing a black suit riding around at night.
Sure. And to give some context there, and I think that this committee will have a look, the Transportation Board recently looked at bicycle on sidewalk policies. And so state law says you cannot ride your bicycle on a sidewalk in a commercial area and gives absolutely no guidance as to what that is.
Right.
So the town, the Transportation Board and the police, with some advice from the Bicycle Advisory Committee, a committee on which I serve, essentially decided what are commercial districts for the context of this rule. And zoning isn't particularly helpful for that, except at the highest levels and so forth. And so the town policy, which is in accordance with state law, is you have to walk your bike in a commercial district. If you're in a residential area, you're certainly free to ride your bicycle on the sidewalk, but to simplify the way it's worded, you got to be polite. You got to behave, right? And so that means if I'm riding on a relatively narrow sidewalk and you're walking in the other direction, I'm going to defer to you. If that means I hop on the street, if that means I come to a complete stop, whatever it is, and that's a person-to-person interaction, and most of the time those actually work really well, in the same way that most of the time a motorist will, wave a pedestrian across the street even if they're jaywalking, because it feels like the right way to go. Regarding bicycle ninjas, bicyclists who wear all black and race through town in the middle of the night, so you have to have a front light and a rear reflector. That's state law. You don't have to wear a bright orange jacket. That's optional and recommended. And that's, again, sort of the kind of thing that a Complete Streets Committee in this second phase can think about interacting with Bicycle Advisory Committee, Transportation, and Police and saying, look, are there ways that we can work on this in a productive manner? So instead of running around and giving tickets, maybe you give a ticket to the bicyclist without a light and you say, if you come to the police department with a receipt for a light, we'll tear up the ticket. Because what we want is better behavior. The revenue's okay, but what we really want is better behavior. And so this committee can start to think about things like that later. I mean, it's not going to be the first item of her business is not getting cyclists to have bike lights, right?
No, but it is learning how to share the very complex
That's right.
resource relationships that we've got.
And I would add that there's no bicyclist who would rather ride on the sidewalk. It's understood to be uncomfortable and difficult to share and not the best of place to be. The cyclists who are there because that particular cyclist at that particular moment believes it to be safer than the alternative. So as we create bicycle infrastructure on the pavement that is separate from the sidewalks, that cyclists believe is safer, they're going to use it. They'd rather use it. But when we don't have that infrastructure, the cyclist has to sort of choose. And all transportation users are implicitly lazy, right? Motorists park in the spot closest to the door. Pedestrians jaywalk and cross diagonally. And cyclists will, take the shortest route or ride if they can get away with it rather than walking. And that's a human condition that we have to design our streets understanding so that the users can act seemingly naturally and still behave safely and courteously in the process.
Thank you.
Further questions for Dr. Vitola? Seeing none?
I'm off to read a bedtime story.
Thank you.
Good night.
Drive safely.
Shifting gears from bicycles, no pun intended, we'll move to the Preservation Commission. We have a candidate for reappointment, James Batchelor. I see Mr. Batchelor here. Hi, Jim. Well, tell us about what you've been doing on the Preservation Commission, why you want to be reappointed, and what you hope to achieve in your next term.
Thanks very much. I'm Jim Batchelor, 29 Manchester Road. And I'm happy to be here to reapply for a continuing role on the Preservation Commission. I have actually, I won't say totally enjoyed it, but it has been, I I mean, it's interesting as a person who was not, call it 15 years ago, that in favor of preservation. I did see our neighborhood, the Graf McKay neighborhood near the Devotion School, become threatened, and was pleased to see it protected as a local historic district. I joined the commission. I was there through a period of time when the commission was somewhat controversial, and I feel one of the things that I've tried to do on the commission, I come as an architect but not a preservationist, is to find ways that the commission can respect the desires, I wouldn't say necessarily rights, whatever, of homeowners, so that they can do with their home what they would like, but also do it in a way that's in keeping with the history of the town and the culture of the town, which I think in the long run, I've found people in this town really respect. Most people are here for a quality of life that has a physical character, and it's embodied in the homes and in the commercial districts in a way which I find when the conversation has that flavor, whether they're applicants or people on the board or neighbors, in general, I've been pleased to see that people rise to the occasion, and it's been reasonably well received. So I've been grateful that it's gone that way. I try to run the meetings in a way that is respectful of what people want, whether it's preservation or not, and that the outcome is in the best interest of the overall town. And so far, I think it's sort of going okay.
Jim, as we, since you're the chairman and we have you here, and we're going to be considering appointments very soon, tell us a little bit about the mix on the Preservation Commission currently, and if there's any skill set you feel like you're lacking.
Sure. I think that it's a good question. I haven't necessarily prepared for it. But I do think that it is, at the present time, the case that there are a number of people who are architects. And I think that the commission needs to have a reasonable mix of people who have some kind of design background, whether it's architecture or landscape architecture, something that involves perception of the visual built environment. I think that we need to be fully balanced in terms of having the range that is in the legislation. I forget all the things that it mentions, but we are definitely helped by having an attorney who is part of the mix. That's been, I think, quite helpful. And we've typically had some representation in terms of other professions from people who are in real estate roles, whether it's real estate broker or others. I think one of the things that I know has been somewhat challenging for us is to find people who are from the different local historic districts. I happen to be from one of them, but I think we have had sometimes some challenges finding people who actually live in those districts. So I don't know what the best ways are for reaching out, but I would agree that having a reasonable complement of people who are from those districts is a good thing.
So you did great with that question, even though you weren't prepared.
I actually thought there was, I'd have to look it up, but I kind of thought there was an expectation or something in the bylaw rules and regs about trying to have representatives from each historic district. I'm asking this only because now there are more of them. And with more districts, it would mean, I don't know whether you'd still get the balance of representatives with skill sets, and anyway, I'm not sure you have to even answer that.
I view it as a good thing that there are more districts for a variety of reasons, including a larger pool of applicants.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's an interesting point. My real question for you was, I'm looking at your agenda for your next meeting, and you've got 5 demolitions.
Right.
It seems like every time I look at an agenda, there are 3 or more. It's not just 1, and it's never 0. And what's your sort of overall observation about the number of demolition cases?
It's definitely growing. I mean, I think the fact that the economy is strong and many people would like to live in Brookline, and I think that there is, in general, considerable pressure to increase the size of all premises in Brookline. whether it's a smaller house or whatever. People are trying to expand, and one of the things that I've noticed about the demolitions, I think everybody has, is that these are in some ways should be good for the town, that people want to come in and fix these places up or build new, but it is often felt to be a loss. And it's part of the, I think, challenge of our situation is that a lot of people want to make demolition or what could be called partial demolition. In other words, if you remove enough of the roof or the walls of a building, that actually counts as partial demolition. I think it's a big challenge for the town. I tend to feel that it's a good role for the Preservation Commission because I think it slows down some of the pace of that. For those who are not familiar with how it works across the entire town. In other words, this is not something that applies just to historic districts. It applies to all properties. So we see all kinds of properties, and our only power is delay. But it does seem to help. So I think in some ways it's part of the landscape that we live in, and I think we're fortunate to have that tool to at least have some influence.
And I guess I don't want to keep you on this obsessively, but do you feel that when the cases come before the commission, the owner or developer is listening, or do they just kind of go through the process and wait it out?
That would be a good statistic to get. My
Yeah, it would.
impression is that a lot of people don't wait it out, they try to solve.
Okay. I mean, if you can have a constructive negotiation as opposed to
And I think
just sort
a
of
fair
filing
percentage
and...
of the time it does
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
Selectman Waschinsky.
One of the comments as we expanded the number of districts was that the workload of the commission and staff would grow to a point where you can't handle it. Has that happened, or what's your impression of the workload?
I think the workload has grown. It's grown proportionally to the number of cases. The NCD process, Neighborhood Conservation District, has also added to the workload. I think it is a problem. I think people are struggling.
Okay, anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Oh,
Just
Selectman
one
Daley.
quick question. Then do you, maybe the commission could benefit from being larger, so you could divide up some of these tasks? Would you think that was appropriate?
I don't think they are related. I think the number of staff hours is related. I don't think the number of people on the commission is a part of the bottleneck.
No, we've been hearing the staff is overstretched. Now, I will admit, I believe one member had a sort of family crisis ongoing for a while, and I hope that's now not demanding so much time. But I would say the commission has been lacking the full staff support that you both need and are accustomed to.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, anything further? Thank you, Jim. Appreciate your time and think all you contribute to the town. Happy Thanksgiving. Agenda item number 10 is a question of proceeding with the new bylaw review committee, noise bylaw, excuse me, missing a word in the agenda, noise bylaw review committee. So if you remember, warrant article for the recent town meeting proposed some revisions to the noise bylaw, specifically with regard to leaf blowers, but in a couple of other senses too. As you know, that warrant article was defeated at town meeting, but it begs the question whether our committee should move forward or shouldn't move forward. And I know Selectman Franco is interested in this issue. You want to start the conversation? This is meant as a conversation item between the five of us. So.
I think we should go ahead.
Yeah, I think that the outline of the charge that Selectman Franco set forth in his memo of November 20th looks appropriate to me.
I think one of the one of the fears, I think, that drove the town meeting vote was the fear that we would be narrowing the definition of leaf blower.
Right.
And I would suggest to you that that should not, we shouldn't be narrowing the definition.
Right. I thought, as I interpreted the comments we received in the run-up to town meeting, there was a question of inconsistency between two different
Right.
sections within the
Right.
bylaw. I think there is, I will say, I think the majority of people in town believe that the current restrictions we have on leaf blowers are the bare minimum, which is appropriate, and there is a vocal, I don't know how large, group that would like to see additional restrictions put on. I don't see this committee as being the organ to have that discussion. I think, as it was articulated to me, or as I understand the conversation, we're simply looking at inconsistencies between the two, not a discussion about how should we restrict leaf blowers, or what should those restrictions be.
Yeah, I see it as a technical exercise.
Correct.
To straighten things out and makes.
But I do hope, even though it's a technical exercise, that thought would be given to the issue of multiple of these devices. I mean, in other words, if our standard is the noise level of one device and there are three operating together, I think we should consider whether there is some level of regulation that we want to think about for situations like that, because I don't think it was anticipated. I think when the bylaw was actually originally drafted, it was sort of assumed that we're talking homeowners, by and large, taking
No,
care.
we actually had considerable discussion about that, and when we had the original noise bylaw committee, which I co-chaired with Mr. Lebo. And Mr. Lebo would give you decibel levels, about two of them are not double, one, and so on.
Well, I would like some field tests. I think
Yes.
my request is, we need to actually know what this noise level really and truly is. And I will tell you, on my afternoon walk today, there were three operating simultaneously, and absolutely, it was deafening, and it was a horrible, horrible thing that should not be in a residential neighborhood with little kids playing outside.
They may have all been over the
I bet they
limit.
each one were individually, and together they were, it was like being behind an aircraft taking off.
Well, let me step back and just sort of outline, maybe for people who don't have this memo in front of them, what this committee is going to be, what the proposal is for it to be charged with. First, to Selectman DeWitt's comments, the draft charge talks about reviewing enforcement provisions and procedures. And I think that your comments fall squarely within that.
Okay.
In addition to sort of a technical review of, are the noise meters
Do
in
we
the
have
right
the right-
place?
yeah, right.
Can we get them to where they need to be in a timely fashion? I think a review of what is the impact of two or more devices functioning at the same time. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not an acoustical engineer, but I'm sure we can find one in town. The second sort of component of the charge.
One or more.
One or more. Thank you for the correction. The second component of the charge, as it's articulated in this memo, is that issue of inconsistencies, identifying if there's inconsistencies between the noise bylaw, section 8.15 of the town's general bylaws, and the leaf blower bylaw, section 8.31. And then this bullet point number 3 is really prescribes what the deliverable of this committee would be. As I drafted it, it would be recommending coming up with a recommendation in the form of a warrant article delivered to this board as to what an appropriate action would be. I would say that I reviewed this today, and I would recommend, I would like to see a slight change made to that third component of the charge, being not just in the form of a warrant article, but also in proposed changes to town policies or procedures. I think that it's a little bit too prescriptive right now.
I have another proposed change to that same bullet point, 3.1. I would just add the words, any recommended changes to noise bylaw enforcement provision. So recommending to the Board of Selectmen in the form of a warrant article.
Or changes to town policies and procedures.
Right, or changes, and then one, any recommended changes. It almost sounds like you better come up with some
Yep.
changes. And it may be that that the committee finds that everything is appropriate as currently configured.
That would be great.
Right.
Yeah, you might even say if necessary.
If necessary, that's even better, so it's not saying
Yeah.
recommending twice. Thank you. But I agree with what's been previously stated. I still think that this committee has a valid purpose, and, but I'd also agree, the idea is not to, increase the number of leaf blowers that are legal, or there's no policy change that we're seeing, but we do want a bylaw that's enforceable and readily usable.
Right, clear.
We want to make sure it's clear, and we want to make sure what we're trying to do is actually done.
Right.
So,
Selectman Daley, you probably can answer this because you were closely involved, but I kind of recall that there were some discussions, at least, about standards for the landscape operators, like, were they not supposed to have noise protection devices or something? Didn't you talk about those things?
I don't, I mean, I think
I'm thinking
those are-
about sort of health and safety for the
Yeah, I think those
operator.
are sort of covered under OSHA regulations, maybe. I don't think they're really in our bylaw. What we did with the leaf blowers was say they had to have this sticker from
Right.
ANSI, I think it was, or something,
Right.
saying that it met a certain standard.
Right.
And then nobody had to go out with the noise meter if it had the sticker on it.
But then
So
you
that-
have to, if there's
so-
a question, you have to be able to get close enough to the
Yeah.
blower device to see the sticker to know whether or not it's actually been tested.
Right, but I would suspect from many of the ones I hear, because the level we picked was pretty, the quiet.
Right.
So I would suspect from many of them I hear in my neighborhood that there's an awful lot that are, particularly the commercial.
Right. Right.
Companies that come around with, as you say, often more than one person with these things, that they sound to me like they're over what they're supposed to be.
and I think there's an education component. I think that's
Oh, yeah.
part of the enforcement.
Yeah.
It's sort of making people aware that this is a law in the town, and it's the expectation that everybody's going to comply with it. I'm certainly not going into this looking to maximize revenue and hand out as many tickets as possible. I want to make sure that we make people aware of what this is, and if necessary, figure out how to enforce it.
Well, one of the reasons we did that, if it has the sticker on it, it's okay, thing was we were trying to make it really easy if, say, you called the
Sure.
police and said, there's something really noisy going on
Yeah.
next door, because one of the issues initially was that the police department had one noise meter.
Right.
And so if it were the right person who was trained in how to use that wasn't available, or they couldn't find the
Right,
meter or
right.
something, nothing happened. So we were trying to make it so it would be easy for the police to come out and say, you don't have that sticker on there, you're not, you have to go get tested or something, that you have to shut down, in other words,
Right.
because you don't have the sticker on there.
One question that I have, and maybe this is something this committee can think about, is whether or not there's some sort of obligation on the part of the homeowner who has contracted with this service to be at least educated and aware of the noise bylaw, because it seems to me there's a kind of a funny trade-off here. It's clearly my impression that the multiple ones where they're being operated by two or three at the same time are also, in a way, trying to shorten the amount of time spent on the property. So there may be an issue having to do with how the financial contracts are set up or something. I don't know. If it's by the hour and then the contractor finds it's more effective financially to have 4 running at once and do it all in 15 minutes or some silly thing like that, as opposed to a quieter approach, which would take longer, and therefore theoretically the person has to pay a higher hourly rate or something. I don't really know how those things
Yeah.
are structured, but.
And I'm not sure this committee is going to get into examining sample contracts for landscaping design, but.
No,
I
but think about whether
Yeah.
there's a way to connect the dot. That's really what I'm saying.
Okay, so I see a consensus for proceeding with this committee, and
Yeah, can I
think-
just restate for Kate's benefit,
Well,
3-1 now?
Well, let's make why don't we make a motion, and
All right.
with the suggested amended language, and I was going to actually let Selectman Franco make the motion,
Okay.
since he's taken charge on this.
Well, I will move, I guess, adoption of the charge as amended in this memo dated November 21st in our packets. Do you want me to read the
Yeah,
charge?
why don't you read it with the changes, please?
All right. The Noise Bylaw Review Committee was established by the Board of Selectmen in October 2014. The committee was established following the filing of a citizen petition of 2 warrant articles at successive town meetings, the annual 2014 town meeting and the November 2014 special town meeting. The articles sought to amend the existing noise bylaw. The town meeting's voted no action on the articles indicating rejection of the changes sought. Still, the Board of Selectmen felt it appropriate to form a committee to review the bylaw because of comments received during the warrant article review process. The charge of the Noise Bylaw Review Committee shall be 1. Reviewing the enforcement provisions and procedures of the existing bylaw to ensure effective and efficient regulation of excessive noise. 2. Considering whether inconsistencies exist in the town's general bylaws between the noise bylaw, section 8.15, and the leaf blower bylaw, section 8.31. And 3, recommending to the Board of Selectmen in the form of a warrant article or changes to town policies or procedures. 1, if necessary, changes to the noise bylaw enforcement provisions and procedures. And 2, remedies to inconsistencies that may exist between sections 8.15 and 8.31 of the general bylaws. The Noise Bylaw Review Committee shall disband upon filing of its recommendations with the Board of Selectmen.
Everybody clear on the motion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye. Selectman Daley?
Aye.
Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We have about 3.5 minutes before our public hearing on license transfer, item 11. In the meantime, why don't we do our boards and commission appointments, which is agenda item number 13. I'll hand the meeting over to Mr. Kleckner to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have 2 committees on the calendar this evening. The first is the Advisory Council of Public Health, and there are 2 expiring terms. There are 2 incumbents and a new candidate, and I will read them off. So we have 3 candidates for 2 slots, and I'll read them off as they appear on your sheet.
I'm sorry, could you give me 1 second?
Certainly.
Catch up?
Yep. So this is the Advisory Council on Public Health.
Because we have the Commission for Women first in our package.
Right before that.
Okay.
13-1.
Yeah, I don't know what happened.
Here, look at that.
Thank you. Okay, I'm up to speed, thank you.
Okay, so I'll read them off, and you can indicate your preference. Patricia Marr.
Aye.
Aye.
Anthony Schlaff.
Aye.
Larry Oni. Okay, so Ms. Marr and Dr. Schlaff will be reappointed to the Advisory Council.
And their terms will be through 2017?
Correct, full 3-year
Yeah,
terms.
okay.
And now we move on to the Brookline Commission for Women. In this case, there are 1
6.
expiring term and several vacancies, and
think
we
the total
have a
is 6.
sufficient number of vacancies for the applicants, and I will read them off.
How are we going to apportion the terms?
Well, they're all 3-year terms beginning in 2014.
Okay.
That's my suggestion.
Well,
We
you're
do
just
have-
going to allocate
We do have
the-
other,
the-
we do
the-
have other vacancies that are shorter than 3-year terms, but we have sufficient number of 3-year terms, and that would
Okay.
be my suggestion.
In this case, it's the same, the numbers
Gotcha.
matching.
Okay.
Okay. Jamie Tober.
Aye.
Christine Fitzgerald.
Aye.
Rita McNally.
Aye.
Ginny Vaz.
Aye.
Grace Young Watson.
Aye.
Aye.
Very good.
Excellent. So now we're 2 minutes before our hearing, but it gives me the chance to say that I'm recusing myself from this next agenda item due to a business relationship. And so I'm going to hand the meeting over to Selectman Daley to continue from there and probably to delay for about a minute and a half.
Okay.
Only when it's over.
I think we're in the final 30 seconds here, Mr. Gladstone, so if you want to get started.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do for Thanksgiving.
Yes, certainly, yeah.
What do you serve me for dinner?
Yeah.
Well, the important thing is that I am not traveling this year. And I otherwise would have been right at that 84-90 split.
Ooh. Yeah.
If I started now, I would make it by Friday night.
Are you cooking, though?
Someone in my house is cooking. I bought.
Well,
How about that?
I suppose that's something.
I will clean. I will lift the turkey out of the oven.
Yeah.
You ready?
Yes,
Okay.
go ahead.
Great. So I'm Scott Gladstone. My office address is 1244 Boylston Street, Suite 200 in Brookline. And I represent Prestige Food and Liquors, Inc. And I'm here with Atul Patel, who is the gentleman in the suit. He is the principal of the company. He is here with his two brothers, who are well-known businessmen in the community. Harry owns Kirkman's Market, and I'm sorry, I forgot the other brothers. Owns the Subway on Harvard Street. So these are longtime friends of the Brookline community, and we're excited to reunite the family and welcome Atul to the Brookline business community after he's been a strong member of the business community of this Long Island community for a number of years, including 2 card and gift shops which sell beer and wine, and there's that's Long Island for you. But he does have experience with alcoholic controlled beverages. There's also a family-owned full liquor license liquor store. So he has that experience. He's taking over an already established, he's proposing to take over an already established entity at Beacon and Summit. He's not going to make any changes. The consumers are not going to see really any difference at all. Perhaps a better run store, maybe a cleaner store, we would hope. Mr. Patel is familiar with all of our local requirements, not just as related to alcohol, but relate to stores of his size and kind, as well as all the state regulations. He is going to be the manager. He intends to be the person running the store as is required under the management requirements of the rules.
Okay. Why don't you come up to the microphone, Mr. Patel?
I have a technical question which actually maybe can be answered just before. I realize going through the forms here that there didn't seem to be a place to list hours, and yet I think we would like to know what the operating hours are planned to be. And then my other comment is that we always encourage the appointment of an alternate manager because our regulations expect that there'll be somebody full-time on the premises, and we do think that every now and then people have to be away, so.
Right, and I've explained that to him, and they want to get up and running.
Sure.
And then they're going to, if it's not going to be a member of the family, they need to identify a qualified person once they're here. And of course, all the employees are going to be tips trained.
Sure.
But of course, there's that extra little bit for the manager.
That is one of the things I'm looking through, and perhaps I missed it, but I didn't see that Mr. Patel has already gotten his tips training?
He does.
Was it in there?
I'm told it is in the packet.
Okay.
He has
in there.
his original certificate with him.
Why
But
don't you...
I can inquire about the hours, because actually, I don't know that, the answer to that. What hours are you intending to operate?
Same hours,
Same hours currently. I'm sorry, 7 in the morning until, okay, but you're not selling alcohol at 7 in the morning.
He can't sell alcohol.
They have a food, then we're gonna morning
Right.
food, and after is the alcohol, and after 7 to 11 o'clock.
It's 11 o'clock, 7 days, not later on weekends. Okay. So there you have it. And of course, the manager, I assume, is only required during the hours in which he's legally able to sell the alcohol.
Right.
Okay, come on up to the microphone, Mr. Patel. So we've actually had a couple of issues at this location with selling to underage people, as I recall. I don't, maybe somebody remembers it better than I do, but, and we have many, many students that live in Brookline, so we do take our liquor laws very seriously. And periodically, our police department does stings, you know, where they will send somebody in.
I've mentioned this.
Okay. So I want to hear from you, you know, what procedures you intend to follow to make sure that you are adhering to our liquor laws.
Anybody gonna buy the liquor, anything, then we're gonna make sure his ID and age 21 and up, and make sure we're gonna after sell the like liquor, beer, alcohol. Also, we check also the like under minor and also the intoxicated person, and after the sell the alcohol.
Well, I'm sorry, what was the last part?
Intoxicated person.
Oh, intoxicated.
Oh, okay.
Intoxicated.
Yes, I saw that you'd had one incident at your other location on that, so you're aware of that. And so what, I think what we want to also see, though, is a commitment on your part to make sure that all your staff is trained, so that, you know, if you're not always going to be the one behind the cash register, and you must make sure that all of your staff is properly trained.
And you know, just for my part, as I always try to do for my clients in this situation, I've put together a very easy English type bullet point summary of all the rules that include all of those requirements, and including as is required by the rules, a written procedure that needs to be reviewed and signed by all of the employees, if you'd like to review what I typically do.
Okay, yeah, great,
Sure.
we'd like to see it.
I do something similar for the restaurants, and the police love my form. I told them they could use it, it's not proprietary, they could use it for all the establishments.
Well, he does seem to have very comprehensive material that he's giving his client. Any other questions?
Well, only because it came up with regard to a license that we actually just approved. I understand that another family member owns an alcoholic beverage place in Leicester, Mass? Okay, so my question is, will the family be divided between managing, supervising these two facilities? Or are there other people in charge? We had a situation where the two family members own two separate establishments. It's mostly got to do with needing to have an alternate manager in place. It's not, so that there's not a divided.
Who is running the Leicester?
Is Hershey Patel?
No, different. Harshad, not Harshad. Okay.
Okay,
So
all right.
who is he in relation to you?
He's a manager.
Okay. Not related.
My real question is,
Okay. I mean, he's going to work at this.
he will work at this store, he will not have responsibility for the other one. That's my question. Okay.
Other questions? Okay. Well, Oh, this is a public hearing. Is there anyone here who wishes to speak in favor or in opposition to this application? Nope, seeing no one. I'm going to say that it looks like everything is in order. There was some, the usual, the health department has their usual list of recommendations or conditions. Is that?
They had a meeting with the health department
Okay.
to go over the conditions and what their expectations are.
Okay, great. Otherwise, everything seems to be in order. So I'm going to move favorable action on this transfer of the alcoholic beverages license and, let's see, as a package store at 1416 to 1420 Beacon Street for a transfer of said license to Prestige Food and Liquors, Inc., doing business as Bay State Foods. Atul Kumar Patel, did I get that kind of close? All right. President. And in addition, the question of approving the application of Prestige Food and Liquors, Inc., doing business as Bay State Foods, Atul Kumar Patel, President, holder of an all kinds alcoholic beverages license as a packaged goods store at 1416 to 1420 Beacon Street for a pledge of license to Bay State Food Shops, Inc. All in favor, Selectman DeWitt?
Aye.
Selectman Waschinsky?
Aye.
Selectman Franco?
Aye.
And I'll vote aye. So we wish you good luck. And we hope we don't see you here for any violations. All right.
Thank you.
Yes.
You too.
Take care.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Oh, here he is. Oh, what fun.
Our next and now final agenda item is a continuation of our override study, committee report review, and preparations for our upcoming decision about a potential override and debt exclusion. And tonight, we're going to focus specifically on the subject of debt exclusion and capital needs. And I know Mr. Cronin's got a presentation for us, so without further ado,
All right.
launch right in.
Sure, so, should be a very short presentation, but I hope there's a lot of questions afterwards. So what I want to do is really two things. One, just kind of update folks as to where the numbers are, and then two, just talk very briefly about what the CIP we're working on now, what the stresses on that are directly related to these issues. We don't have a CIP, a formal CIP presentation planned yet, because as you'll learn, we're still waiting some information from the school committee, but I'll touch on that in a little bit. So,
Can I, before you go into this,
Yes.
just prepare you for a question that I would have? And I, based on what you've presented to us here, I don't know if you are prepared, so maybe this is something that will come in a follow-up. But I was just going through the financial plan CIP for fiscal 15, this year.
Correct.
Nope,
yes?
15, okay. And I wanted to know whether there are many changes that we will see in the budget process going forward. In other words, I know we're talking about the debt exclusion question, but there are a lot of items that are schools-related that are under the CIP that wouldn't necessarily be covered by the debt exclusion vote. So you may not be able to answer this, and that's okay, but I would like you to be in a position to update us about those things.
Yeah, there will definitely be some changes, and not just on the school side, on the town side. I mean, everything other than devotion is within the 6% CIP financing guidelines. So
Okay.
you'll get a full presentation hopefully in January, if not later in December.
Okay, just to
But
give you
There are
the-
some things that will,
Yeah.
there's a couple projects that are looking for more money. There's,
Okay.
the roof, the masonry plans have been more fully integrated into the CIP, things like that.
Okay, we're carrying numbers for classroom capacity and educational technology, and those continue to be as proposed?
The classroom capacity number will be more, and the technology numbers will actually be less, because after that document was finalized,
Right.
if you remember, the CIO
Right.
took on some of those responsibilities, and we were able to
Right.
reduce that. So all
Okay.
the ed tech stuff going forward, other than a small amount, are in the override figures.
In the operating budget now,
Correct.
as opposed to the...
Yes.
Okay, I was just trying to be clear about whether there were components still as part of the CIP going forward, and I guess really the classroom capacity number was the one I most was interested in.
Mhm. Yeah, there'll definitely be changes on that.
Okay.
Yep. All right, so the Override Study Committee, there were two recommendations, as you're very familiar with. One was, actually, let me even step back further. So when we developed the last couple CIPs, we said that the CIP financing policies, which is 6% of revenue, could finance $54 million of a devotion school project. Anything above and beyond that would be needed to be covered by debt exclusion. So as you see up here, the CIP had $54 million of town funding, $33 million from the MSBA assumed at that time, and then that meant that $23 million would have had to have been covered by debt exclusion. So $77 million of total town commitment toward that project. So what Group 1 said was, do that. Take the delta between 54 million and the then updated cost of 77 town share, and you come up with 23 million. Group 2 said, whether it's for Driscoll or some other project, you need to free up capacity within the CIP, because if you only have 54 million for devotion, you don't have anything for any other project. So they recommended excluding the full amount for Driscoll or some other project to the tune of $35.8 million. So Group 1's recommendation equated to a $1.6 million annual increase in the tax levy. That's the estimated principal and interest payments on a 25-year term, level principal, which is level debt service, which is one of the recommendations of the Override Study Committee. Group 2, by adding $35.8 million to that, adds $2.5 million of annual debt service. So if you went with Group 2's recommendation, it would be a $4.1 million annual for 25 years increase in the tax levy to pay for those two projects. So that's what the Override Study Committee recommended. So since then, the Devotion School Building Committee has made a recommendation, which has been just approved last week by the MSBA, schematic design option, so-called Option 1. And at the end of September, when the architects presented this, they updated the cost, which was a total of $118.4 million. And unfortunately, their analysis showed that our effective our effective reimbursement rate would be 24%. There's a statutory reimbursement rate that is, I believe it's 30% for everybody, and then based upon basically economic indicators of a community wealth, property value, you can get up, higher than that. And I think we're somewhere around the 35-36% range. And then you can get incentive points. But there are caps on a couple of items within MSBA guidelines. One is per square foot for construction costs. One is, I think it's 10% total for soft costs, and I believe 8% total for site prep. So if you exceed any of those thresholds, the rest is on you. So the architects were able to estimate that our effective rate would be 24%.
And just to be clear, my understanding is, you may be able to correct me, that MSBA has not updated its per square foot cost allowance to reflect current actual construction costs.
I believe that's the case.
Yeah, which puts them as I last heard, about $200 per square foot
I think it was
below.
like 250, but it's still
Okay.
way off from what
It's just totally out of sync with the actual projected construction costs.
Correct.
Right.
Yep. So when you do that math, you still have the $54 million within our CIP. MSBA is 27.8. So if the total is 118.4, that means we would have to exclude 36.6. So just go back one slide. What was $1.6 million annual increase in the tax levy is now $2.6 million. So it's another $1 million for 25 years. If you go to option 2, that stays the same, it's 2.5, right, for a total of 5.1. So what was 4.1 is now 5.1 because of the cost estimates in the effective reimbursement rate estimate for the Devotion School project. So that's bringing up to speed as to where we're at now. However, one thing that could make these numbers even higher is the reason why you don't have a formal CIP before you like you normally would at this time of year is because we're still working with the school committee. There's no easy decisions for the school committee to make. Every option has some negatives to it, and they're still fleshing out all those options. But we need a decision from the school committee in order to put together a CIP that can be presented and then obviously folded into the town administrator's financial plan. So, here's just a couple of the options that the schools have been talking publicly about, have been talking to us about, and, some of them are going to require potentially decent amounts of money, whether it's modulars at the Baker School or reusing the Spurver Center over here and making that into classroom space. Whatever the ultimate decision is going to cost some money. The CIP cannot afford that. So whatever that amount is, in order to finance that, you need to increase the debt exclusion. So if it's $2 million or $5 million or $10 million of short-term costs that are needed for next school year, you need to consider that when you talk about your debt exclusion number. So does that make sense? Because it's a really important part to...
I just wanted to add, Sean, you mentioned, we need these projects in order to put together our budget, but this board needs them, and that's your final point there, by mid-January, when you will be asked to actually form a question, a ballot question.
So do we know that the school committee is on what I'll call a glide path to a decision within that time frame?
They're working on it, yep.
I'd say they're struggling with it.
I want to say that I'm a little, I think it's not really appropriate, and even if the override study committee did this, to talk about a debt exclusion for the Driscoll project, which we're not very far on. And so I think the real question is, do we have a larger debt exclusion for the Devotion project, which would leave money in the CIP for other projects, Driscoll or Pierce or whatever it might be? Or do we have a smaller debt exclusion for the Devotion project? But I think, frankly, that is how we should be talking about this and thinking about it and framing it, because I think that talking about a debt exclusion for projects that are still quite theoretical is not really the way to go.
Well, we can't, because if we cannot have a debt exclusion on the ballot for a project that isn't formulated.
You can't have, because we're not borrowing. If you don't know what you're
Yes.
borrowing, you
So
can't.
we have to frame it as
Yes.
what's going to be on the ballot is going to be X dollars for the Devotion School.
And that's
Right.
what Group 2's
But-
recommendation
but
was.
that-
That's exactly
okay.
what it was to free
But
up
that
the
said-
tax.
The mechanics.
Yeah,
Okay,
Selectman
I'm just-
Daley,
I'm
you're
just
right.
saying your first couple of slides talked about other projects, and I really
Well,
think that...
at one point, there was we have submitted a statement of interest on the Driscoll School
Correct.
project to the
What's-
MSBA. So at one point, I think it was a little bit more of a realistic
Right,
project.
but I think what Selectman Daley was, the point she was making, and I would agree with her, is that it's very important to leave some flexible capacity in the CIP in order to address classroom needs, which we may, or the school committee may not be able to have defined or even added costs to by the date in January when we have to approve this number.
Exactly.
So can I use that as a segue to the next slide?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, actually, this is the tax impact. I'll come back to that. I don't want to minimize that. I'll come back. But that was a great segue to this. So, clearly been working very closely with the town administrator on, pulling this CIP together. Again, traditionally it would be online for folks to view, and there'd be a public hearing in 2 weeks, but we're just not there yet. So these next 3 slides speak to the tightness, the capacity issue of the CIP. So 2 CIP cycles ago, which was the 14 through 19 cycle, stood here before you saying that because of the devotion school project, there was a very significant crunch on the pay-as-you-go side. If you remember, our CIP policy says that 6% of prior year net revenue should go to your capital plan. Of that, there should be some debt and some cash. The goal is 5% cash and 1%, actually it's 4.5% debt, 1.5% cash, I think. You see in the first years, we're right along the lines of our goals and our policies, and then in 18, 19, 20, we have very small amounts of pay-as-you-go. So a year ago, just about, we came before you with the fiscal 15 to fiscal 20, the now current CIP. And what we proposed was actually fully exclude the devotion school project, 100% of that, and that would then free up money for the Driscoll School project.
That was the 77 million, was that?
Yes.
Okay.
So exclude all the 77 million, it frees up money for Driscoll and some portion of a high school project a few years out. So I think we term that the, one vote, 2.5 project kind of approach. But one of the things it also did, and I know I mentioned this and probably nobody remembers it, which is fine, but what it did is it actually normalized the pay-as-you-go issue that we had. So again, if you just go up one, you see we had, looking at the right-hand side, virtually no pay-as-you-go, $800,000 in fiscal 18, right? So then you go to this slide and you see that there's about $4.7 million in fiscal 18. So it really took a lot of the capacity issues that we were having out of the equation. Fast forward to what we're working on now, and again, these aren't final by any stretch, we're right back to where we were, which makes sense because we were saying exclude $77 million and it frees up money to do these other things, and it takes pressure off of the CIP as a whole.
So this is only devotion?
Well, this is excluding just devotion.
So
Yes.
this is the 30 whatever
Yes.
$million scenario.
Correct. Yep.
So we're back in
So you see, we run into pay-as-you-go issues in fiscals 2021, and if I pulled this out even more, which I have, but not for you, there's actually a negative number in like 23 or something. So there are difficulties when you don't free up some additional capacity, exclusive of these short-term needs that the schools are grappling with right now. Because this doesn't include any of those costs. So that's why, going back to one of the earlier slides, I said anything that's necessary for short-term space relief next school year is going to require you to either increase the debt exclusion or have us rework the CIP, meaning take out some projects.
Okay, so this is the Group 2 recommendation?
No,
That's
this
Group
is
one.
Group one.
Group one
just
with
excluding
updated
devotion.
Okay.
numbers.
Yeah, with the
Okay.
updated numbers, yes.
Okay.
Just excluding devotion.
Now, I seem to recall that Group 1, and I can't get my hands on it, I was looking, was recommending funding for a small project at Devotion for the cafeteria.
Yeah, I think I can quote one of the members, that that's basically rounding error anyway. And some,
Well,
you finance that over 15 or 20 years.
No, I understand that,
$100,000 a
but was that project ever on the CIP?
No. The only Driscoll project that was in the CIP is an HVAC project, which the Director of Public Buildings is going to tell you has to get done. that was pushed out because we were contemplating a, significant project. So there hasn't been anything in there for that, and I don't think there will be anything in there for that.
So I have another follow-up question to my earlier one, because I was looking at the presentation for the annual budget at town meeting, and although Devotion and Driscoll are listed there, the high school was in the, I guess, the statement of projections without, I guess, actually being included in the CIP, is that right, the high school?
No, we had it in the CIP, and I believe I referred to that as a backed-into number.
Okay.
And what I was able to do was, again, we had originally $54 million of CIP dedicated to Devotion. We then needed $27 million of that to finance our share of Driscoll.
Driscoll,
That
right.
then left $27 million that you could apply.
So that was kind of the balance that was it was the uncommitted amount left, right?
Yep.
Okay. So it seems to me, my conclusion is that the more we put on the ballot for Devotion provides us with greater flexibility in meeting those needs that we know continue to be there, and gives us the flexibility to schedule in, I would say, the most, and here it's really going to be a negotiation, but clearly, we don't know yet what the timeframes are going to be, and I don't want us to be locked out of the capacity to do what's necessary for the next school year. I'm not talking about September 2015, I'm talking about September 2016, because I'm not clear that we have the solutions.
I agree.
Have I made myself clear? Murky?
I agree with that statement, but with one asterisk that a high school project down the road would not be affordable without some sort of debt exclusion.
Okay,
We've got
in
some-
addition,
yeah,
an
we've-
additional debt exclusion.
Just like we're talking about
Right.
Devotion now, where we've got some capacity but not enough, would be the same story for the high school.
So we're heading on a path of multiple debt exclusion overrides. So whatever the solution we come, well, there's going to be a few things going on. One is going to be a short-term thing, and my personal inclination would be to provide enough capacity to do some of the short-term stuff and build that into the debt exclusion override. Then we're looking at whatever is going to be the solution for the elementary problem, enrollment problem. And then we're going to be looking at whatever is going to be the solution for the high school problem. So we're looking at potentially 2 additional debt exclusion overrides within the next
3 years?
3 to 5 years.
That's right, but I think that's an important sort of threshold question here. You hit it on the head, and a year ago, there was discussion about, one override, take your harsh medicine now and get it over with. But I agree with you, Selectman Waschinsky. At this point, given that we're still in the middle of the school capital needs consulting study that's, due to report in the spring, due that we don't have an answer on high school expansion yet, I think it would be a very difficult sell to the voters of Brookline to ask for debt exclusion for projects that haven't been identified. And
No, but-
and by the way, given that Driscoll has come into question of whether that project will go forward or not.
Well,
But I think we can all agree that some other steps need to be taken. And so we need to have capacity in the CIP, even if it's just modulars or something like that. But it's probably got to be more than that, and we've got to have some flexibility. We know the problem is there, we know the need is there that isn't being met, and we've got to have enough of a debt exclusion for Devotion, I think, that we still have some capacity to stick with our financial policies, but address some of these other issues
But I'd like to
in
be
some
working
way.
with grounded numbers at that point, too. So I'd like to understand what modular at Baker is likely to cost, and I'd like to understand what, if the Sperber Center is to be repurposed, what that's going to cost, et cetera. And the school committee knows that we're looking for this, but I think that's critical.
I seem to, what was mentioned earlier tonight, that we did submit an SOI on the Driscoll project. I seem to remember that response was due either last month or earlier this month.
They pushed it out, I think, to January.
Okay.
But we could hear in January, so that's another sort of timing question.
And that could change the discussion.
Right.
Mr. Cronin, you have more to show us? Yeah, you do, obviously.
I just went back to the slide that I skipped over, the tax impact numbers. So the numbers right in the middle were based on the OSC's numbers, so it was about a 1% increase under Group 1 and about a 2.5% increase under Group 2. Update the numbers based upon the new devotion school estimates. You'll see that it rises to about 1.5% and just about 3% for Group 2. So, the point there is that, obviously, with the greater town's share required, at least based on the estimates, there's a larger burden on the taxpayer.
And bear in mind, we're going to have a more detailed conversation entitled Ability to Pay in just a couple of weeks from now, but this is...
So it seems to me, too, that before we land on a number, we're going to need to know what are some of the other enrollment solution-based needs are. And that's what we've been talking about. And we're also going to need to know what's going to be the level of the operating override, because in the end, we have to consider the whole package, and then, how are the voters going to react to that?
Right. There's only so much money in the well.
Right.
I note that you haven't updated the cost figures for the Driscoll project or the Driscoll Light project that falls under option 2. Is there, and I understand that this project is theoretical at this point. There's no plans, there's no certainty on what it would be. Can we learn any lessons from the cost increase in devotion that can be applied to the Driscoll project, or do you think that figure, that placeholder figure that's in there remains realistic, or?
I think you're making a fair point. I'm sure that the numbers would probably be higher based
Were
upon...
these numbers provided by our architectural consultant during the B-Space process?
Well, the number,
think so.
we had carried 40, I think it was 48 some odd million in the CIP. And then the Override Study Committee, the capital subcommittee of that group, did their own analysis, I think on a per square foot basis, and came up with the $55 ballpark million number. Because they share the same concerns that you're voicing, that number was not adequate.
Speaking of school projects and MSBA funding, is there any chance whatsoever that MSBA will get its per square foot allowance aligned with actual construction costs? Brookline can't be the only community that's got a project going forward with such a huge gap.
Yeah, I believe we asked the architects that at one of the devotion school building meetings, and I think they said once a year they take it up, and they use previous actual, not what's coming in the marketplace now.
Mm-hmm.
So
There's still going to be a lag.
There'll be a lag, but hopefully they at least move, north somewhere.
Yeah. I think the other thing in addition to construction costs that are rising, the other thing we have to bear in mind when we're talking about what kind of debt exclusion to put on now is we have been at historic low interest rates.
Which are going to end.
Which are going to, yes. I think as
Lock them in now while you can.
As the Federal Reserve stops, it's doing its tapering off and so forth. So in terms of thinking about our projects that are coming, and, it may be better to try to think about, we clearly have the need now. I think to the extent we can, we need to think about accelerating some of our processes so that we take advantage of this low interest rate environment, before we get into a situation in which construction costs continue to rise as the economy improves and the interest rates start to rise, and the whole projects are going to get far more expensive.
Yeah, the problem, of course, is, we're stuck with the MSBA schedule, and their processes, it takes years to go through the process. And even if we weren't bound to that process and we were going to be funding it, it's still going to be a, multi-year process. If we were to start the process to get a building going today, it's going to be a couple of years, 2-3 years from now before we start financing it.
Well, it would be useful, though, at least to look at some variables like interest rate and what, if any, information we can establish about MSBA's review of their per square foot cost allowance. It might be that if we ran the calculations, we might prefer to have devotion start at a point at which the reimbursement rate went up. I don't know. That'd be interesting to run the numbers.
I think there's another side of that equation too, though, about getting the kids in there as fast as possible, right?
No, I'm not. I'm just simply saying I would like to have at least some calculations to show what the trade-offs are.
Well, we are assuming 5%, which I think anybody would say that is a pretty conservative estimate.
Yeah, right.
It is 25 years, though, remember that.
Have we ever paid 5%?
A long, long time ago. It's been, as Selectman Daly said, it's been a great environment to borrow money over the last number of years, so. But actually, just on that, we will be phasing the borrowing.
Right. So it's not going to be an immediate tax hit.
It's not going to be an immediate tax hit, and there could be different interest rates, but depending upon when we borrow it. It'll probably be done over 3 chunks, based on the cash flow.
When is the 1990s era financing for the high school paid off?
High school, we just refinanced that with MSBA. I believe that has about 8 or 9 more
Oh,
years.
that much?
Yeah. Because we didn't actually permanently finance that until, I think, 2001 or 2.
Wow.
Because there was a few years of bans, and then permanently financed it.
Do you, I mean, I know there's a limit to how many projects you can be presenting to the MSBA. So is the thought that if we were to move forward with something at Pierce School to alleviate some of the issues there?
That would not likely be an MSBA.
That would not likely be an MSBA.
It depends on the scale, of course.
Yeah. But that's the kind of thing I'm thinking, is that we need to sort of, put these all in a grid and figure out which ones we should be moving ahead more quickly on. And the ones where we're not anticipating getting in the sort of slow MSBA process maybe are projects that we would want to move ahead on very quickly.
Well, I think all the short-term ones are in that category.
Just a process comment. I think we're starting to have discussions on the level of the override and what to put on the ballot. And given the level of interest in the town and prior discussions, now we're starting to really talk turkey to get us to decisions. I find it interesting that the room is pretty empty. So I think we need to do a better job of publicizing our discussions, and I'll be happy to help with that. But I think we need to get the word out that it's turkey time.
Well, that's certainly true, but I will say, until we have a clearer understanding of the school committee's direction, it's very difficult to nail this down. And I hear a level of, I don't know about how much, but a certain level of frustration that we would otherwise be prepared to move forward on the financial plan. And this is going to hold us back, separate from the whole matter of making a decision about how much debt exclusion goes on the override.
To Selectman Waschinsky's point, I want to reiterate that among the four of you, that if you have suggestions on how we should proceed now that we're in the end game here, please, I know Mr. Kleckner and Mr. Cronin and I are all ears in how we get our agenda.
I hope we are going to have just some discussion. There were both, I guess, Group 1 and Group 2 were proposing significant cuts on the town side of the budget, some of which I think have already been made, some of which I'm not sure are terribly appropriate. In addition, I know there are some town side of the budget people that would like to propose some increases as we're discussing this override, and I hope we're going to have
That's
some...
next week. Next week.
Okay.
Yeah. Next week's discussion is called non-tax revenues and
Municipal reduction.
municipal reductions, so that's...
So if you know people who want to have proposals, let us know.
Okay.
We have, the library trustees have definitely asked to come.
Yes,
in.
yes,
That's
okay.
the only one that I'm aware of.
Well, I had some discussions with Mr. Papasturgeon, and I hope he will be coming forward next week to flesh out some of the things we talked about. But I will sort of
And
pass
I think we
the
should,
word.
at the very least, put something out on the TMMA listserv, and I'll be happy to do that, just, letting people know. And perhaps on the school Facebook page.
I'll say, I heard through the grapevine that the superintendent is going through his winter forums around the district, and as part of that meeting, he has articulated the fact that we are in the process of having these sorts of conversations, and that this is an appropriate venue for people to show up to make their voices heard.
Yeah.
So,
But one of the things I think I hope maybe Mr. Kleckner, you can reach out to the Chamber of Commerce or something, but one of the proposals was further meter increases.
Parking meter.
Yes, and we not that long ago, we did already raise the parking meter rate. So, we typically do not do that without quite a bit of discussion, and, I'm always mindful that people can go over to the Chestnut Hill Mall and park for free. And so, we've got to be a little bit careful about what we're doing with meter increases. So, I think that's one area that people may want to step
Yeah, I'm
forward.
assuming the chamber will be here next week. They're
Okay.
very aware of it.
I don't know whether it's Mr. Kleckner or Mr. Cronin, but are we looking at preparing for the financial plan I'm thinking about now, and I know that these two things have to be sort of fed together, financial plan and override, but are we looking at a set of different scenarios for the financial plan, a no override scenario, an override at X amount scenario, and an override at Y amount scenario?
Well,
What are we thinking about?
We're gonna not build our budget until we get direction from this board about how much the override is. But there will be, of course.
Well, there has to be the no override.
scenario,
Okay.
but we're not going to create different levels of an override.
Okay, so
We're gonna create
I
that.
guess what I'm looking for here is the sequence, and what I'm hearing you say is we need to commit to override numbers that will then permit us to go forward with a no override and an override budget scenario.
Yes.
Two only.
But to say that we are prepared to preview some of the issues based on certain scenarios, I believe in December, on December 9th, I think we have that continued discussion about a no override. But before we actually prepare detailed budgets, we would need the board's decision in January.
Yeah.
Well, and there's a huge decision I think we all have to have some discussion on, is if the override were not to pass, under our sort of town-school partnership agreement, under our historical way of operating, the town side of the budget has been tight in recent years, but we have not been experiencing the sort of crisis that the schools have due to their enrollment. So would we be anticipating sharing the pain if the override were not to pass, and if, to what extent would we do that, and what impact would that have on, basic services on the town side of the budget?
Well, I mean, generally, the answer to the question is yes, of course. We would, if there was an override proposal failed, we feel like the town values education, and we would be prepared to support whatever needed to be done.
Well, not in the blank check sense.
We're looking
Not in the blank check
we're looking
sense.
at that, and we're going to have some further details on that on December 9. But your second part was what, Nancy?
Well, I mean, we also value trash collection and police.
Police and fire services.
So I guess the question is, I think we as a board maybe need to have some discussion on to what extent could we take cuts if that were the scenario, and
we're planning for December 9th for that discussion.
And is there a plan to, I know we as a board have talked about the actual structure of the override. Is it going to be one question? Are we going to adopt a pyramid scheme? And I think the board has sort of assumed that this is going to be a pyramid model. We're going to put 2 questions on the ballot and allow the voters to choose.
well, we have to have, the debt exclusion has to be separate by law
Well,
from the
But
operating.
I'm saying,
But you're saying
2 within an operating override and 2 for a debt exclusion. And
Okay.
I just wonder.
Well, I
if
think
we're-
you're ahead of the
don't think
rest
a
of
debt
us on the
exclusion-
assumptions.
I don't think a debt exclusion can be a pyramid.
Okay.
And
Right.
as to
That's
the
what's said.
operating, I agree, that's been the discussion. I've recently heard some questioning of that.
Well, it's-
Where I was going with this was I wanted to just make sure we return to that conversation and formalized a decision rather than unconsciously sort of stumbling into
No,
a...
No, I don't think we're
That's
going to
not, that's not a, that's not a
No, that will
given.
not be a
And-
decision we stumble on.
And there again, as I have been pointing out to people, that is this board's decision, not anybody, everybody else can certainly give us their recommendations, but.
Absolutely. I want to make sure that we exercise our right to decide.
Yes.
Well, but I would say, and maybe this is something Mr. Kleckner can help us with by kind of, working out what I would call a timetable, but it seems to me it would be useful for us to have some benchmark deadlines for when we have a set of figures that are sufficiently, and I don't know even how to fill in the blank here, reliable, that we can accept for a no override scenario, and then how we build up from that to choose the correct amount for an override. It seems to me we don't have any of that right now.
Right.
And I think everybody is feeling, we can't make any decisions unless we get that.
We've given you the overall numbers, right, Sean? We've updated the, I should say, we just met with the School-Town Partnership Committee on Monday, yesterday. And so I guess we have to share those with you. But, the overall gross numbers for the override and the operating budget, the 65, the 90%, this issue around the debt exclusion and the 2 options, I think those are defined. It's the questions about if no override passes, then what happens?
Well, and I guess what I'm thinking is that because of the changes since the Override Study Committee did its calculations and the adjustments that have to be made, what I'm looking for is a matrix, perhaps, where we've got the variables that we may be able to select and say, okay, this is the package that we feel we can defend, support, whatever you want to call it. And I don't think we have all those variables at this time.
We've got a lot of work to do.
And I will say, on the last time we put an override on the ballot, and Selectman DeWitt and I were both on the board at that time. I don't know if you were there, no. We did pyramid it because there was some money going for some town and school issues, and then there was the question of the foreign languages in the elementary schools, which people wanted to extend.
And extended time. We
Yeah.
actually, the big thing there was the additional school time, school day.
Yeah, was that in the
That was in the bottom.
bottom?
Yeah.
I think
The
that
base
was
of the
the
pyramid.
basic part.
Base,
And
right.
there's only
so
one
the-
program in the.
So the question,
You're right.
it seemed like it was absolutely imperative that the basic one pass, and we said to the parents, we think you can go out there and rally the troops and get the foreign language thing passed if you want to do that, but it seemed to me at the time that it was absolutely imperative that we pass the basic amount, and, if we didn't have the foreign language, people would be unhappy about it, but the schools could continue to operate. I don't see that kind of obvious thing in this case, that you would pyramid. I don't know, if people can give us a suggestion, but something, for instance, the technology stuff, I'm being assured by a lot of people that, yes, we really are behind on technology in our schools. So, some of those issues, I don't know if there's really a rational or appropriate place to divide it into two things. But I'm willing to listen if somebody, has a suggestion, but it doesn't seem as obvious to me as it did the last
seems to me if we're going to have a pyramid, call it 65, 90, whatever the numbers are, we have to explain the difference in terms of programs, what additional programs
Yeah.
are we going to be providing? So, it's got to be a program base.
I want to reject, though, totally, something you just said. I don't think we should be dividing it along the lines of what the different groups on the override study committee recommended.
I'll agree with you
I
there.
mean, they are an advisory body to us. I think we have to think about it, and I'm certainly not willing to put on something just because some members of the override study committee said it one way and some members of the override study committee said it another way. So that to me would not be a valid basis to pyramid this thing. I would pyramid it if you
I would
if we
pyramid it-
specifically had some programs that you
But
thought
I
were
think it's a
not
piece of
essential.
information that kind of tells us the state of the electorate, that the override study committee came in as divided as they did. And it's a piece of information we need to, I think, really think about long and hard. We have to consider the politics of this thing.
Yeah.
Now, whether we come in with their numbers or even their exact methodologies, or divide it exactly the way they did.
Yeah, I mean, I have had actually some members of the group that recommended the smaller amount say to me, we didn't feel like we got adequate information from the schools, which you are now getting as we
Right,
as we push.
and the report says that.
Yeah, and so that their recommendation was based, to a certain extent on a kind of, a little bit of a,
Right.
I don't mean to be harsh, but a little bit of a punitive.
Right, especially in the technology area.
We're not going to give you stuff because you didn't really explain it adequately. I don't really, that doesn't really work for me. I also think that as we look at, I mean, if you told me that there's a couple of programs that are in there or something, we don't really need school nurses or something, I mean, I personally don't really see a good dividing line, and I would not say that we should be dividing it up just because two groups in the override study committee said, do it this way, do it this way. But I'm willing to listen if somebody has a kind of more rational approach to how you might divide it or pyramid it. but-
One of the things that I hope will happen that might help us with the decision-making is to get from the superintendent, from Peter Rowe or whoever, a better what I'm going to call matrix spreadsheet that really quantifies the presentation that we got a couple of weeks ago, that in effect shows us the dollar value for those different components that we were in effect being told were part of the variables in the package. Because it seems to me that without that, it's very difficult to come to conclusions.
And it's difficult for me. I don't have the operating recommendations in front of me, but my recollection is that Group 1 partially funded the technology ask.
Right.
Group 2 fully funded it. That was not the way that the school committee or the superintendent presented the technology funding to us.
Right.
So I just want to reiterate that and caution.
And you have
it's
to-
not a direct correlation between the way the schools are talking about things and the way the overall study
Right.
committee looks at it.
Exactly.
That's true.
But, I think one of the problems with the Group 1 recommendation for me was that they were admitting in there that we'd need another override very shortly. And I know you, I believe it was you, Chairman Goldstein, just said we might need another one, debt exclusion, in the near future. But I think that we have had a little bit of a history with general overrides, and we have tried not to do them super frequently. We all know what a tremendous effort is involved
We
in
have
reaching out to the
had
voters.
2 general overrides
Right.
since Proposition 2.5
Yeah.
passed in 1980.
So,
That is
so a scenario that's saying, oh, and by the way, in a couple of years, you're going to need another one. I don't think that's what the voters anticipate in Brookline, and I don't think it's,
Well, I think
you
if
know.
they're prepared for it, that's a different story. I think 2 unplanned overrides in rapid succession are a problem, but I think if that's the plan and if it's presented that way.
Well, but
then-
that, to me, was one of the problems with the Group 1 recommendation.
Well, and the other point, which I know we've raised before but hasn't been discussed in a while, is that this will be the first time that we have both a debt exclusion and a general override on the ballot at the same time, which is certainly something that we need to consider as we go through the process of crafting a question or multiple questions.
All right, well, I'd like to bring this conversation and this meeting to a close. I think this has been, frankly, our meatiest conversation to date about this. I feel like we're getting there, at least we're developing a strategy each in our own minds about how we're going to get to the end here. And I thank you for that. I wish everybody a happy, healthy, and delicious Thanksgiving. And go Brookline High against Newton North.